Hi everyone, welcome to Red Umbrella. I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to argue that Family Guy didn't simply steal from The Simpsons. It followed a pattern as old as television itself, taking a proven formula and pushing it to extremes. The relationship between these shows reveals three important truths. First, every successful adult cartoon that came after The Simpsons, South Park, King of the Hill, Bob's Burgers, all of them, borrowed the revolutionary idea that cartoons could be for adults, making Family Guy's debt to The Simpsons less like theft and more like industry standard practice. Second, Family Guy's reliance on shock value, random cutaway gags, and offensive humor created something fundamentally different from The Simpsons, transforming what The Simpsons proved was possible into something The Simpsons would never actually do. And third, the plagiarism accusations themselves became a marketing tool that both shows used for publicity, ratings, and comedy, turning what could have been a lawsuit into a profitable business strategy. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free, and it really helps us improve these videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. Section 1. The Simpsons rewrote the rulebook, setting the stage. Before we can even begin to answer whether Family Guy stole from The Simpsons, we need to understand what The Simpsons actually did in 1989. And to understand that, we need to talk about what television looked like before The Simpsons existed. In the 1980s, cartoons were for kids. That wasn't an opinion or a preference. It was just a fact of how the entertainment industry worked. When you turned on your TV and saw animation, you knew exactly what you were getting. Saturday morning cartoons like He-Man, Thundercats, or G.I. Joe. Maybe you'd catch some Looney Tunes reruns. If you were really lucky, you'd see something from Disney's Golden Age playing on the Disney Channel. But all of it, every single frame of animation on American television, was made for children. Adults didn't watch cartoons. That would be like adults watching Sesame Street or reading picture books. It just wasn't done. Animation was seen as a tool for creating colorful, simple stories that would keep kids entertained while their parents made breakfast. The idea that a grown person would sit down after work, turn on the TV, and deliberately choose to watch a cartoon? That was absurd. It didn't happen. The entertainment industry had convinced itself that animation had a ceiling. You could make great animated movies. Disney proved that with The Little Mermaid and other classics. But those were still family movies, things you'd take your kids to see. The notion that animation could be for adults, that it could deal with adult themes and adult humor, that it could satirize politics and society and culture? Nobody believed that was possible. More importantly, nobody believed that was profitable. Then, on December 17, 1989, everything changed. The Simpsons premiered on Fox, and it did something that had never been done before in American television history. It took animation, a medium that everyone agreed was for children, and made it for adults. Not in a creepy way, not in the way that some weird late-night experimental show might do it. The Simpsons made a prime-time half-hour comedy show that was animated, that dealt with real adult issues, and that made adults laugh out loud. The show followed the Simpson family in the fictional town of Springfield. Homer Simpson was an overweight, beer-drinking father who worked at a nuclear power plant and constantly screwed up. Marge was his patient wife with distinctive blue hair who held the family together. Bart was their rebellious 10-year-old son who got in trouble at school. Lisa was their smart 8-year-old daughter who played saxophone and cared about the world. And Maggie was their baby, who never spoke but was always there with her pacifier. On paper, this sounds like a pretty standard sitcom family. You could describe dozens of live-action shows from the 1970s and 1980s with almost the same description. Bumbling dad, patient mom, troublemaker kid, smart kid, baby. Shows like All in the Family or Married with Children had similar setups. The innovation wasn't the family structure. The innovation was that these characters were yellow and had 4 fingers. That might sound like a small thing, but it wasn't. By making The Simpsons animated, creator Matt Groening could do things that live-action shows couldn't. Homer could get hurt in ways that would hospitalize a real person and be fine in the next scene. The show could parody movies, TV shows, and celebrities with visual gags that would be impossible or too expensive in live action. The town of Springfield could be whatever size it needed to be for any given episode, sometimes a small town, sometimes a sprawling city, because the animators could just draw whatever they needed. But more than the technical advantages, animation gave The Simpsons a certain freedom. Because it was a cartoon, people gave it more room to be outrageous. The show could criticize religion, politics, and corporate America in ways that might have gotten a live-action show in serious trouble. There was something about seeing these yellow cartoon characters do it that made the satire go down easier. People laughed at jokes they might have been offended by if real actors said them. The numbers tell the story of how revolutionary this was. The Simpsons' first season averaged about 13 million viewers per episode. For context, that's more people than watched most primetime dramas. Fox was a new network at the time, trying to compete with the big three networks, NBC, CBS, and ABC. The Simpsons became their flagship show, the program that proved Fox could hang with the established players. In 1990, just a few months after the first season finished, The Simpsons won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program. This was the first time an animated show on primetime television had won a major Emmy. The Flintstones had been nominated for Outstanding Comedy Series back in the 1960s, but The Simpsons was doing something different. They weren't trying to be a regular sitcom that just happened to be animated. They were using animation as a tool to make comedy that couldn't exist any other way. The cultural impact happened fast. By the early 1990s, Bart Simpson's catchphrase, "Eat my shorts," was everywhere. Kids were wearing Bart Simpson t-shirts to school, often shirts that their parents and teachers found inappropriate because they had slogans like, "Underachiever" and "Proud of it." Homer's frustrated exclamation, "Dope," became so popular that it was added to the Oxford English Dictionary in 2001. When a made-up word from a cartoon makes it into the actual dictionary, you know something significant has happened. The show didn't just entertain people, it changed how people thought about what animation could be. Before The Simpsons, if you told someone you wanted to make an animated show for adults, they would have looked at you like you were crazy. After The Simpsons proved it could work, suddenly that became a viable career path. The show opened a door that had been locked shut for the entire history of American television. This is where Seth MacFarlane enters our story. MacFarlane was in college in the mid-1990s, studying animation at the Rhode Island School of Design. His plan was simple and straightforward. He was going to work for Disney. That's what you did if you were a talented animator who wanted to make a living. You made beautiful, family-friendly animated films for children. That was the dream. That was the path. That was how animation worked as a career. Then MacFarlane saw The Simpsons, and his entire career trajectory changed. In his own words, which he's repeated in multiple interviews over the years, The Simpsons rewrote the rulebook. He was doing stand-up comedy at the time and loving it, but he didn't think there was any way to combine his love of comedy with his skill in animation. Animation was for kids. Stand-up was for adults. They were separate worlds. The Simpsons showed him those worlds could merge. In a 2022 interview, MacFarlane explained it like this.
I started to rethink things and go, they've really rewritten the rulebook. Suddenly, I'm watching a cartoon that's making me laugh and is for me, an adult.
The stuff that I was doing in my stand-up routines could meld with animation. Notice what he's saying there. He's not talking about The Simpsons as just another TV show he enjoyed. He's talking about it as something that fundamentally changed what he thought was possible. The Simpsons didn't inspire him to make better Disney movies. It inspired him to throw out the Disney plan entirely and chase after what The Simpsons had proven could work: adult animation. MacFarlane wasn't alone in this realization. South Park creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone have said similar things. King of the Hill creator Mike Judge has acknowledged The Simpsons' influence. Bob's Burgers creator Lauren Bouchard studied what The Simpsons did. Every adult animated show that came after The Simpsons owed its existence to The Simpsons proving the concept could be successful. This is crucial to understand before we dive into whether Family Guy stole from The Simpsons. The Simpsons didn't just make a good show. They invented an entire category of television that didn't exist before. They took something everyone knew was impossible, adults regularly watching animated sitcoms, and made it not just possible, but hugely profitable. By the time Family Guy premiered in 1999, The Simpsons had been on the air for 10 years. 10 years of proving that adult animation worked. 10 years of Emmy Awards and merchandise sales and cultural impact. 10 years of showing television executives that there was serious money to be made in animated shows aimed at grown-ups. That's 10 years of evidence that made it safe for Fox to gamble on another adult animated show. When Seth MacFarlane walked into Fox's offices with his pitch for Family Guy, he wasn't trying to convince them that adults would watch cartoons. The Simpsons had already won that argument. He just had to convince them that his version of an adult cartoon was different enough from The Simpsons to be worth making. Think about what a massive advantage that was. Matt Groening had to convince Fox to try something that had never worked before in American television history. He had to make them believe that people would actually tune in to watch an animated sitcom in primetime, that advertisers would buy commercial slots during a cartoon aimed at adults, that this wasn't a crazy idea doomed to fail. MacFarlane didn't have to do any of that. The Simpsons had already proven the model worked. All MacFarlane had to do was convince Fox that his show would be successful enough to justify the production costs. He was painting inside lines that The Simpsons had drawn. This context matters enormously when we ask whether Family Guy stole from The Simpsons. Every single adult animated sitcom that exists today, Family Guy, American Dad, South Park, Bob's Burgers, Rick and Morty, Big Mouth, all of them, exists because The Simpsons proved it was possible. They're all standing on The Simpsons' shoulders. They all owe a debt to what The Simpsons accomplished. The question we're really asking isn't whether Family Guy was influenced by The Simpsons. Of course it was. The question is whether Family Guy crossed a line from influence into theft. Did Seth MacFarlane take inspiration from The Simpsons and create something new? Or did he essentially copy The Simpsons' homework and change just enough to avoid getting caught? To answer that question fairly, we need to understand exactly how much The Simpsons changed the landscape. We need to recognize that in 1989, The Simpsons was revolutionary. By 1999, when Family Guy premiered, adult animation was proven territory. The Simpsons had taken all the risk. Later shows, including Family Guy, got to walk through a door The Simpsons had kicked open. This doesn't automatically mean Family Guy stole anything. Lots of great art builds on what came before. The Beatles were influenced by Chuck Berry and Little Richard. But nobody says the Beatles stole music. Steven Spielberg was influenced by Alfred Hitchcock, but nobody says Spielberg stole directing. Influence is normal. Inspiration is how creativity works. But there's a difference between being influenced by something and copying it. There's a difference between building on someone's ideas and just repackaging those ideas with a new coat of paint. And that's the line we need to figure out with Family Guy and The Simpsons. The Simpsons created the blueprint for adult animated sitcoms. They established that you could have a dysfunctional family, use animation to enhance the comedy, satirize American culture, and make people laugh while also making them think. They proved this formula could win Emmy Awards, generate massive merchandise sales, and run for decades. When Family Guy premiered 10 years later with a dysfunctional family, animation-enhanced comedy, satire of American culture, and jokes that made people laugh, the similarities were impossible to miss. But were those similarities theft? Or were they just the natural result of working in a genre that The Simpsons had invented? Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. That's what we're going to figure out. But first, we need to understand exactly how Seth MacFarlane went from planning to work at Disney to creating a show that would be endlessly compared to The Simpsons. Because his journey from college student to television's youngest executive producer reveals a lot about how directly The Simpsons influenced what would become Family Guy. Section 2. Seth MacFarlane's origin story. How The Simpsons changed one man's life. Seth MacFarlane's path to creating Family Guy starts in a pretty normal place for someone who would eventually make cartoons for a living. He was a kid who loved animation. He watched Saturday morning cartoons, studied how they were drawn, and practiced making his own characters. By the time he was a teenager, he knew exactly what he wanted to do with his life. He wanted to work for Disney. This wasn't some wild dream. MacFarlane had real talent. He was good enough at drawing and animation that he got accepted into the Rhode Island School of Design, which everyone just calls RISD. This is one of the best art schools in America, the kind of place where serious artists go to turn their skills into careers. For someone who wanted to animate, getting into RISD was like getting accepted to Harvard for someone who wants to be a lawyer. It meant you were good, and it meant you were serious. MacFarlane's plan was straightforward. He'd study animation at RISD, build up a portfolio of work that showed what he could do, and then get hired by Disney. That's what successful animators did in the early 1990s. Disney was making incredible movies during that time. The Little Mermaid came out in 1989, Beauty and the Beast in 1991, Aladdin in 1992, The Lion King in 1994. These weren't just successful movies. They were cultural events that made hundreds of millions of dollars and won Academy Awards. If you were a talented young animator in the mid-1990s, Disney was the dream. You'd work on beautiful, family-friendly films that millions of people would see. You'd be part of a legendary studio with a history going back to Walt Disney himself. You'd make good money, have job security, and get to tell people at parties that you worked on Disney movies. It was a clear path, a good path, and MacFarlane was headed straight down it. Then, The Simpsons changed everything. MacFarlane has talked about this moment in multiple interviews over the years, and he's always very clear about what happened. He was doing stand-up comedy while he was in college. This wasn't his main focus. His main focus was animation. But he loved performing, loved making people laugh, loved the creative freedom of stand-up where you could say whatever you wanted and push boundaries in ways you couldn't in other forms of entertainment. But stand-up and animation seemed like two completely separate worlds. Animation was clean, family-friendly, made for kids. Stand-up was edgy, adult-oriented, made for people who wanted jokes about real life. MacFarlane figured he'd have to choose one or the other eventually. Maybe he'd do animation as his career and stand-up as a hobby. Maybe he'd get really successful at stand-up and leave animation behind. They didn't seem like things you could combine. Then he started watching The Simpsons, and suddenly the wall between those two worlds came crashing down. In an interview from 2022, MacFarlane explained exactly what happened. I was doing stand-up at the same time The Simpsons started to take off, and that altered my trajectory. I started to rethink things and go, they've really rewritten the rulebook. Suddenly, I'm watching a cartoon that's making me laugh and is for me, an adult. The stuff that I was doing in my stand-up routines could meld with animation. Read that quote carefully, because it tells you everything about how directly The Simpsons influenced Family Guy. MacFarlane isn't saying The Simpsons was a good show, or I enjoyed The Simpsons. He's saying The Simpsons changed the direction of his entire career. He's saying it made him rethink his whole plan for his professional life. In another interview, he put it even more directly. Matt's show redirected the course of where I wanted my professional life to go. I wanted to be a Disney animator, and then The Simpsons came out, and in every way, writing-wise, production-wise, timing-wise, animation-wise, it just rewrote the rulebook. Notice he says in every way. Not just the jokes, not just the animation style. Everything about how The Simpsons worked showed MacFarlane a different path forward. And he gives credit directly to Matt Groening, Matt's show, acknowledging that what he's doing comes from what Groening created. Years later, in a different interview, someone asked MacFarlane if he'd ever worked on The Simpsons. His response was immediate. I fucking wish. That's not the response of someone who sees The Simpsons as just another show or a competitor. That's the response of someone who deeply respects what The Simpsons created and would have loved to be part of it. So MacFarlane scrapped the Disney plan. Instead of focusing on making beautiful animated films for children, he started thinking about how to make animated comedy for adults. And that meant he needed to create something that would prove he could do it. In 1995, during his senior year at RISD, MacFarlane made his thesis film. Every student at RISD has to create a final project to graduate, something that shows what they've learned and what they can do. MacFarlane created a short animated film called The Life of Larry. The Life of Larry was about a middle-aged guy named Larry and his intellectual dog, Steve. If that sounds familiar, it should. Larry would eventually become Peter Griffin, and Steve would become Brian Griffin. But in 1995, they were just characters in a student film that MacFarlane hoped would help him get a job. One of MacFarlane's professors saw The Life of Larry and thought it was good enough to send to professional studios. The professor submitted it to Hanna-Barbera, the animation studio that had created classic cartoons like The Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, The Jetsons, and Yogi Bear. This was a big deal. Hanna-Barbera was a major player in the animation industry, and getting their attention as a college student was huge. Hanna-Barbera liked what they saw. They hired MacFarlane right out of college in 1995. He was 22 years old and working as a professional animator. But he wasn't making his own show yet. He was working on other people's shows, learning the business, paying his dues. MacFarlane worked on several Hanna-Barbera shows, including Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, and Dexter's Laboratory. These were all kids' shows on Cartoon Network, not the adult animation he wanted to make. But he was learning how television animation actually worked, how episodes got written, how animation got produced, how you stayed on schedule and on budget. All the practical stuff you can't learn in art school. While he was working at Hanna-Barbera, MacFarlane created a sequel to The Life of Larry. He made a new short film called Larry and Steve, which again featured the middle-aged Larry character and his smart dog Steve. This time, the short was good enough that Cartoon Network aired it in 1997 as part of their world premiere Toon series, which showcased animated shorts from different creators. This is where everything changed. Executives at Fox saw Larry and Steve on Cartoon Network. They saw the same thing MacFarlane's professor had seen: potential. They saw an animator who could create funny adult characters and make them work in animation. And most importantly, they saw someone who might be able to create another adult animated sitcom for Fox. Remember, this was 1997. The Simpsons had been on Fox since 1989 and was a massive success. Fox knew they had something special with The Simpsons, and like any smart business, they wanted more of what was working. They'd tried a few other animated shows, but nothing had caught on like The Simpsons. When they saw MacFarlane's work, they thought maybe he could create the next big thing. Fox contacted MacFarlane and made him an offer. They wanted him to develop Larry and Steve into a full television series. They'd give him money to create a pilot episode, a sample episode that would show what the series would be like. If they liked the pilot, they'd order a full season. This was MacFarlane's shot, and he knew it. Fox gave him a budget of $50,000 to create a 15-minute demo. That might sound like a lot of money, but for animation, it's actually not much. Every second of animation is expensive because every frame has to be drawn by hand. $50,000 meant MacFarlane had to be very careful about what he could and couldn't include. MacFarlane took the characters from Larry and Steve and redesigned them. Larry became Peter Griffin. Steve became Brian Griffin. He added a wife, Lois, 3 kids, Meg, Chris, and Stewie, and set the whole thing in a fictional Rhode Island town called Quahog. He pitched this demo to Fox executives in May 1998. The pitch went well. Fox liked what they saw enough to order a full season of episodes. They wanted the show to premiere in January 1999, which meant MacFarlane had less than a year to build an entire production team, create a writer's room, design all the characters and locations, and get episodes ready to air. At age 24, Seth MacFarlane became the youngest executive producer in television history. An executive producer is the person in charge of the whole show, the one who makes the final decisions about what goes in each episode, who gets hired, how money gets spent. For someone that young to have that much responsibility was almost unheard of. MacFarlane has been very open about what influenced Family Guy. In interviews, he's mentioned several sources of inspiration. The Simpsons is always at the top of the list, but he also cites All in the Family, a groundbreaking 1970s sitcom about a working-class family dealing with social issues. He mentions Jackie Gleason, a comedian from the 1950s who starred in The Honeymooners, a show about a bus driver and his wife. He talks about old Hanna-Barbera cartoons he watched as a kid, but The Simpsons is always there. In interviews where he talks about Family Guy's influences, The Simpsons comes up every single time. And MacFarlane never tries to hide it or downplay it. He openly says The Simpsons showed him what was possible and inspired him to try making adult animation himself. This is important to understand because later, when people accused Family Guy of copying The Simpsons, MacFarlane's response was never, "No, we didn't take anything from them." His response was more like, "Of course The Simpsons influenced us. They influenced everyone in adult animation. They created the whole genre." Family Guy premiered on January 31st, 1999. Fox scheduled it right after the Super Bowl, which is the most-watched television event of the year. 22 million people watched that first episode. That's a huge number. Most new shows would kill for numbers like that. Fox was betting big on Family Guy, giving it the best possible time slot to launch. After the Super Bowl episode, the show moved to its regular time slot on Sunday nights. And here's where things get really interesting. Fox scheduled Family Guy right in the middle of their animation block. At 8 o'clock, you had The Simpsons. At 8:30, you had Family Guy. At 9 o'clock, you had The X-Files. Think about what that means. Fox put Family Guy directly after The Simpsons. Every single week, millions of people would watch The Simpsons, and then Family Guy would come on immediately afterward. The two shows were literally back-to-back. Anyone watching The Simpsons would automatically see the beginning of Family Guy unless they changed the channel. This was both a huge advantage and a huge problem for Family Guy. The advantage was obvious. The Simpsons had millions of loyal viewers, and many of them would just keep watching when Family Guy came on. It was like getting a built-in audience every week. The problem was equally obvious. Anyone watching both shows would immediately notice the similarities. And there were a lot of similarities. We'll get into those similarities in detail soon, but for now, What matters is understanding Seth MacFarlane's journey. He went from planning to work at Disney to creating a show that would be compared to The Simpsons for its entire run. And he made that journey specifically because The Simpsons showed him a different path was possible. MacFarlane never worked on The Simpsons. He never wrote an episode, never animated a scene, never had any official connection to the show. But The Simpsons shaped his career more directly than any job he actually had. It changed what he thought animation could be, changed what he wanted to do with his skills, and gave him the confidence to pitch an adult animated sitcom to Fox. Without The Simpsons, there would be no Family Guy. MacFarlane has said this himself, multiple times in multiple ways. The question we're trying to answer isn't whether The Simpsons influenced Family Guy. That's settled. The question is whether MacFarlane took that influence and created something new, or whether he just made a copy with different character names. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But to answer that question, we need to look at what Family Guy actually was when it premiered. We need to compare it, element by element, to The Simpsons, and see just how similar these two shows really were. Because when you line them up side by side, the similarities aren't subtle or coincidental. They're right there in the basic structure of both shows, impossible to miss and impossible to ignore. Section 3. The Blueprint. Undeniable structural similarities. Now comes the part where we need to be completely honest about what Family Guy looked like when it premiered in 1999. We need to put it side by side with The Simpsons and see what we're actually dealing with. And when you do that comparison, when you really look at the two shows next to each other, the similarities aren't subtle. They're not small details that only superfans would notice. They're right there in the basic structure of both shows, obvious to anyone who watches even a single episode of each. Let's start with the most basic fact. Both shows air on Fox. Now, that might not sound like a big deal at first. Lots of shows air on Fox. But think about what it means in this specific situation. Fox already had The Simpsons, the most successful animated show for adults in television history. They could have said, "We already have our adult cartoon, we don't need another one." Instead, they decided to make a second adult animated sitcom and put it on the same network on the same night in the time slot right after The Simpsons. That's like if McDonald's invented the hamburger, became hugely successful selling hamburgers, and then created a second restaurant chain that also sold hamburgers and put it right next door to McDonald's. You'd wonder why they were competing with themselves. The only reason it makes sense is if Fox thought Family Guy was different enough from The Simpsons that people would want to watch both shows. But when you look at the actual shows, that difference is hard to see. Both shows are about families. Not just any families, very specific types of families with very specific structures. Let's break down exactly how similar these families are. The Simpsons has Homer Simpson. He's overweight, has a low-paying job at the local nuclear power plant, drinks beer regularly at a bar called Moe's Tavern, and constantly makes dumb decisions that create problems for his family. He's not smart. He's not ambitious. He's not a good role model. But he loves his family, even if he doesn't always show it in the right ways. Family Guy has Peter Griffin. He's overweight, has a low-paying job at a toy factory and later a brewery, drinks beer regularly at a bar called the Drunken Clam, and constantly makes dumb decisions that create problems for his family. He's not smart. He's not ambitious. He's not a good role model. But he supposedly loves his family, even if he doesn't always show it in the right ways. Are you seeing the pattern here? These aren't just similar characters. They're almost the same character with different names and slightly different jobs. Both are working-class fathers. Both are overweight. Both drink beer at a local bar with their friends. Both are depicted as not very intelligent. Both stumble through life causing chaos wherever they go. Even their physical appearance is similar. Homer is drawn as a chubby guy with a round belly. Peter is drawn as a chubby guy with a round belly. Homer wears a white shirt and blue pants. Peter wears a white shirt and green pants. The main visual difference is that Homer is bald with two hairs on top, while Peter has a full head of brown hair and wears glasses. But the basic body type, the basic clothing, the basic design, very similar. Now let's look at the wives. The Simpsons has Marge Simpson. She has distinctive blue hair that stands straight up. She's the responsible one in the family. She takes care of the kids, manages the household, and tries to keep Homer from doing anything too stupid. She's patient, caring, and often has to be the adult in situations where Homer is acting like a child. She loves her husband despite his many flaws. Family Guy has Lois Griffin. She has distinctive orange-red hair. She's the responsible one in the family. She takes care of the kids, manages the household, and tries to keep Peter from doing anything too stupid. She's patient, caring, and often has to be the adult in situations where Peter is acting like a child. She loves her husband despite his many flaws. Again, these are not just similar characters, they serve the exact same role in their respective shows. Both are the voice of reason. Both are more intelligent than their husbands. Both hold their families together. Both are drawn as attractive women with distinctive hair. The main difference is the hair color and style, but the function of these characters in their shows is nearly identical. Then we get to the kids, and this is where things get really interesting. Both families have exactly 3 children. The Simpsons has Bart, Lisa, and Maggie. Family Guy has Meg, Chris, and Stewie. But here's what's fascinating. The shows switched which gender each child is, while keeping the same basic age structure. The Simpsons' oldest child is Bart, a 10-year-old boy who's always getting in trouble at school, pulling pranks, and generally being rebellious. Family Guy's oldest child is Meg, a teenage girl who's constantly picked on and treated badly by everyone around her. The Simpsons' middle child is Lisa, an 8-year-old girl who's incredibly smart, plays a musical instrument, and often feels like nobody understands her. Family Guy's middle child is Chris, a teenage boy who's not very smart and awkward around other people, especially girls. The Simpsons' youngest child is Maggie, a baby who never talks and just exists in the background of most scenes. Family Guy's youngest child is Stewie, a baby who talks constantly, though it's unclear who can actually understand him, and has advanced intelligence. So both shows have 3 kids in the same age structure, oldest, middle, youngest, with the youngest being a baby. The genders are swapped around, and the personalities are different in some ways, but the basic family structure is identical. 3 kids, including a baby. Both families also have a dog. The Simpsons has Santa's Little Helper, a greyhound that Homer won at a dog track. Santa's Little Helper is a regular dog. He can't talk, can't do anything a normal dog couldn't do, and mostly just exists as a pet in the background of scenes. Family Guy has Brian, a white Labrador who can talk, walks on 2 legs, drinks martinis, and acts more like a human than a dog. So yes, this is actually a significant difference between the shows. Brian is much more than just a pet. He's a full character who has conversations, goes on adventures, and even tries to write novels. But here's what matters for our comparison. Both shows decided that a family sitcom needed to have a dog. It's not like one show has a dog and the other has a cat, or one has a dog and the other has no pets at all. Both shows include a family dog as part of the main cast. The Simpsons made their dog a normal dog. Family Guy made their dog a talking, drinking, intellectual dog. But both shows said, our family needs a dog. Now let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture of how these shows are structured. Both are set in fictional American towns. The Simpsons takes place in Springfield, a town that could theoretically be in any US state. The show deliberately keeps it vague where Springfield is located. Family Guy takes place in Quahog, Rhode Island, which is specifically located in the northeastern United States. Both towns are populated with recurring side characters that the main family interacts with regularly. The Simpsons has Moe the bartender, Mr. Burns the evil boss, Ned Flanders the religious neighbor, Principal Skinner at the school, and dozens of other townspeople who appear again and again. Family Guy has Glenn Quagmire the perverted neighbor, Joe Swanson the paraplegic cop, Cleveland Brown the calm neighbor, and other recurring characters. Both shows use the same basic format for their episodes. They're about 22 minutes long, the standard length for a half-hour TV show when you remove commercials. Each episode tells a self-contained story. You can watch any episode without having seen the previous ones and still understand what's happening. The characters don't age, don't change much, and always reset back to normal by the end of each episode. Both shows satirize American culture. They make fun of politics, celebrities, movies, television, consumer culture, and everyday life in America. They both use their animated format to create visual gags that wouldn't be possible in a live-action show. They both include references to current events and pop culture that give the shows a feeling of being connected to the real world, even though they're cartoons. Both shows are drawn in a very similar style. They use two-dimensional animation, where characters are drawn by hand and colored in. They don't try to look realistic. The characters have exaggerated features, bright colors, and simple designs. The Simpsons characters are yellow, with 4 fingers on each hand. Family Guy characters are flesh-colored, well, white, and also have 4 fingers on each hand. The animation style isn't identical, but it's very clearly from the same family of cartoons. Both shows were created by one person who has creative control over the content. Matt Groening created The Simpsons, and his vision shapes what the show is. Seth MacFarlane created Family Guy, and his vision shapes what that show is. This matters because it means the similarities aren't just coincidence, or something that happened because both shows had the same production company. These are similarities that came from deliberate, creative choices. And here's maybe the most important similarity. Both shows were sold to Fox as adult, animated sitcoms. They're both aimed at the same audience, adults who want to watch cartoons that deal with adult themes and make jokes that would be inappropriate for children. The Simpsons proved that audience existed. Family Guy was made specifically to appeal to that same audience. When you add all of this up, what you get is pretty damning. Two shows on the same network, in the same time slot, aimed at the same audience, using the same animation style, with the same family structure, overweight father, patient mother, 3 kids including a baby, and a dog, set in fictional American towns, making fun of American culture, using 22-minute episodic formats where nothing really changes from week to week. That's not inspiration. That's not just being influenced by something. That's taking a template and filling it in with slightly different details. Imagine if someone wrote a book series about a young wizard who goes to a school for magic, has 2 best friends who help him on adventures, and fights against an evil dark wizard who killed his parents. You'd immediately say, that's just Harry Potter with different names. The fact that the wizard's name is different, or the school is in a different location, or the evil wizard has different powers, those changes don't matter. The basic structure is too similar for it to be anything other than a copy. That's what we're looking at with The Simpsons and Family Guy. Yes, Peter Griffin is not identical to Homer Simpson. Yes, Brian the talking dog is different from Santa's little helper, the regular dog. Yes, Quahog is specifically in Rhode Island, while Springfield could be anywhere. But those differences are surface level. The foundation, the blueprint, the basic structure, it's the same. And remember, Seth MacFarlane has never denied this. He's openly admitted that The Simpsons influenced Family Guy. He said it changed his career, showed him what was possible, made him want to create adult animation. When someone asks him about The Simpsons' influence, he doesn't get defensive or claim Family Guy is totally original. He acknowledges the debt. So we have the creator admitting the influence, and we have the shows themselves being obviously similar in their basic structure. The case for Family Guy copying The Simpsons seems pretty open and shut, right? Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But here's where things get more complicated. Because the family structure that both shows use, bumbling dad, patient mom, 3 kids, family dog, wasn't actually invented by The Simpsons. That's a sitcom formula that's been around since television started. And if The Simpsons was just using a formula that already existed, then can we really say Family Guy stole from The Simpsons? Or did both shows just use the same standard sitcom template? Section 4. The sitcom formula. Is this even unique to The Simpsons? So we've established that Family Guy and The Simpsons have very similar family structures. Overweight, not too bright father, patient, responsible mother, 3 kids, a dog. Both families live in small American towns and deal with everyday problems in funny ways. The similarities are too obvious to ignore. But before we declare that Family Guy stole from The Simpsons, we need to ask an important question. Did The Simpsons actually invent this family structure? Or were they using something that already existed? Because if The Simpsons was just the first show to animate a type of family that had been on TV for decades, then Family Guy didn't steal from The Simpsons specifically. They both just used the same basic template that sitcoms have been using since the 1950s, and that changes everything about how we think about this debate. Let's go back in time, way back, before The Simpsons existed, before most people even had color televisions. In 1955, a show premiered called The Honeymooners. It starred a comedian named Jackie Gleason as Ralph Cramden, a bus driver living in Brooklyn, New York. Ralph was loud, overweight, had big dreams that never worked out, and constantly came up with schemes to get rich quick that always failed. Ralph had a wife named Alice, who was smarter than him, more practical than him, and had to deal with all the problems Ralph's dumb ideas created. She loved Ralph, but she wasn't afraid to tell him when he was being an idiot. Sound familiar? The Honeymooners only ran for 1 season as a regular show, but it became incredibly influential. That dynamic, dumb husband with big dreams, smart wife who keeps him grounded, became a template that other shows would use for decades. Ralph Cramden is basically the grandfather of every bumbling TV dad that came after him. Jump forward to 1971. A show called All in the Family premiered and became one of the biggest hits in television history. The main character was Archie Bunker, a working-class guy who worked as a loading dock foreman. Archie was set in his ways, had strong opinions about everything, and frequently got into arguments about politics and social issues. Archie had a wife named Edith, who everyone called a dingbat, but she was actually smarter than people gave her credit for. She had patience with Archie that nobody else had. The show also featured their daughter Gloria and her husband Mike, who lived with them and argued with Archie constantly. All in the Family was groundbreaking because it dealt with serious topics: racism, sexism, the Vietnam War, women's rights, through the lens of this working-class family. It used comedy to talk about things that other shows wouldn't touch. And it did it by putting a flawed, often wrong, but somehow still lovable father at the center of everything. Here's what's really important for our discussion. Matt Groening, the creator of The Simpsons, has said multiple times that All in the Family was a major influence on his show. He's talked about how All in the Family showed that a sitcom could be funny while also making serious points about society. He's credited it as one of the key inspirations for what The Simpsons became. So The Simpsons didn't invent the idea of a working-class father who causes problems for his family. That came from All in the Family and The Honeymooners and other shows before them. What The Simpsons did was take that formula and animate it. But wait, there's more. In 1987, 2 years before The Simpsons premiered as a full show, another sitcom debuted that would also influence what The Simpsons became. Married with Children starred Al Bundy, a shoe salesman who hated his job, barely made any money, and spent most of his time complaining about his life and remembering his glory days as a high school football player. Al had a wife named Peggy who spent money they didn't have, didn't cook, didn't clean, and mostly sat on the couch eating bonbons and watching TV. They had 2 kids, a dumb son named Bud and a beautiful but not very smart daughter named Kelly. The family dog was named Buck. And in later seasons, Buck's thoughts were shown on screen, making him kind of like a character who could communicate even though he was a dog. Married with Children was important because it was mean. Not mean in a cruel way, but mean in the sense that the family members didn't pretend to like each other all the time. They insulted each other. They didn't have heartwarming moments where they learned lessons. Al openly said he wished he hadn't gotten married. It was a sitcom that showed a dysfunctional family and didn't apologize for it. This matters because The Simpsons took some of that edge. Homer isn't as openly hostile as Al Bundy, but he's also not a perfect TV dad, like the fathers on shows from the 1950s and 1960s. The Simpsons showed a family that loved each other, but also drove each other crazy. That wasn't new. Married with Children was already doing it. Now let's talk about Seth MacFarlane again. When he talks about what influenced Family Guy, he doesn't just mention The Simpsons. He also specifically mentions All in the Family as an inspiration. He's talked about how All in the Family used comedy to discuss serious topics, and how that influenced his approach to writing. So both Matt Groening and Seth MacFarlane cite All in the Family as an influence. Both shows feature working-class fathers who aren't very smart. Both shows have patient wives who put up with their husbands' nonsense. Both shows use that family structure to make jokes about American society. If The Simpsons took the All in the Family formula and animated it, and then Family Guy also took the All in the Family formula and animated it, then are they really copying each other? Or are they both just working from the same source material? Think about it this way. If 2 students both copy their homework from the same textbook, they didn't copy from each other. They copied from the textbook. Their homework will look similar because they used the same source, not because one stole from the other. This argument would let Family Guy off the hook. Sure, it looks like The Simpsons, but only because they're both using the standard sitcom formula that's been around since the 1950s. The Simpsons didn't invent that formula, they just animated it first. But there's a problem with this argument, and the problem is that The Simpsons didn't just animate an existing sitcom formula. They changed it. They added things. They did stuff with animation that couldn't be done in live action, and some of those specific additions are things that Family Guy also does. For example, All in the Family didn't have a baby as one of the main characters. The Honeymooners didn't have kids at all. Married with Children had 2 teenagers but no baby. The Simpsons made a specific choice to include a baby, Maggie, as part of the family. And then Family Guy also included a baby, Stewie, as part of their family. Now, lots of sitcoms have babies. That's not unique to The Simpsons. But when you combine the baby with the overweight dad, the patient mom, the 3 kids total, the family dog, the fictional town setting, the satire of American culture, and the fact that it's all animated, that's not just following the standard sitcom formula anymore. That's following The Simpsons' specific version of the sitcom formula. Here's another example. All in the Family was set in a real place, Queens, New York. The Honeymooners was set in Brooklyn, New York. Married with Children was set in Chicago. These were real cities that actually exist. The Simpsons made a specific choice to set their show in a fictional town called Springfield. This let them do whatever they wanted with the location, make it bigger or smaller depending on what the episode needed, add new buildings whenever they wanted, create a whole world that existed just for the show. Family Guy also made the choice to set their show in a fictional town, Quahog, Rhode Island. Yes, Rhode Island is a real state, but Quahog doesn't actually exist. This gave Family Guy the same freedom The Simpsons had to shape their town however they wanted. Both shows could have been set in real cities, but both chose to create fictional towns instead. That's not following the old sitcom formula. That's following what The Simpsons specifically did. The same pattern shows up over and over. Yes, both shows use the basic sitcom family structure that's existed for decades. But when you look at the specific choices each show made, how they adapted that formula, what they added to it, how they used animation to enhance it, Family Guy's choices line up with The Simpsons' choices way too often for it to be coincidence. Think about all the different ways you could make an animated sitcom about a family. You could set it in a real city or a fake town. You could have 2 kids or 4 kids or 1 kid. You could make the dad thin or fat. You could make the mom the dumb one and the dad the smart one. You could have no pets or a cat or a bird. You could make the baby talk or not talk. You could use 3D animation or 2D animation. You could make it 30 minutes or 15 minutes or an hour. Every one of those choices creates a different show. And somehow, Family Guy made almost all the same choices The Simpsons made. Fictional town? Check. 3 kids including a baby? Check. Overweight dad? Check. Patient mom? Check. Family dog? Check. 2D animation? Check. 22-minute episodes? Check. Satire of American culture? Check. At some point, we both use the standard sitcom formula stops being a good explanation because the standard sitcom formula doesn't specify most of those details. The standard sitcom formula is just family deals with problems in funny ways. Everything else, the number of kids, the type of setting, the animation style, the episode length, those are choices the creators made. And when Family Guy made those choices, they consistently chose to do what The Simpsons had already done. There's one more thing we need to consider. Even if we accept that both shows use the same basic sitcom formula, there's still the question of timing. The Simpsons premiered in 1989. Family Guy premiered in 1999. That's a 10-year gap. During those 10 years, The Simpsons proved that adult animated sitcoms could work. They won Emmy Awards. They made billions of dollars in merchandise. They became a cultural phenomenon. They showed that you could take the old sitcom formula, animate it, add satire and edge, and adults would watch it in huge numbers. Before The Simpsons did that, nobody knew if it would work. It was a risk. It was trying something new. Yes, they used an existing sitcom formula, but they used it in a brand new way that had never been done successfully before. When Family Guy came along 10 years later, that risk had already been taken. The proof already existed that this formula worked in animation. Seth MacFarlane didn't have to wonder if adults would watch an animated sitcom. The Simpsons had already answered that question. He just had to make an animated sitcom that was good enough to get Fox's attention. So yes, both shows use the basic sitcom formula that's existed since the 1950s, but The Simpsons used it first in animation. They took the risk. They proved it worked. And then Family Guy came along and used the same formula in the same medium with many of the same specific choices. That's different from 2 live-action sitcoms both using the same formula. When Everybody Loves Raymond used a similar family structure to All in the Family, nobody accused them of copying because lots of live-action sitcoms use that structure. But when Family Guy used a similar structure to The Simpsons, people noticed because there weren't dozens of adult animated sitcoms to compare them to. There was basically just The Simpsons, and then there was Family Guy. The sitcom formula defense is a good argument, and it has some truth to it. Family Guy didn't invent its family structure out of nowhere, and neither did The Simpsons. They're both working from decades of sitcom history, but that doesn't fully explain why Family Guy looks so much like The Simpsons, because they're not just using the same broad formula. They're using the same specific implementation of that formula, in the same medium, with the same animation style, aimed at the same audience. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. And there's one element of Family Guy that can't be explained by the old sitcom formula at all. It's something The Simpsons pioneered, something they used occasionally to great effect, and something Family Guy took and made into their whole identity. We're talking about the cutaway gag. And that's where the plagiarism argument gets really interesting. Section 5. The cutaway gag controversy. Family Guy's most obvious copy. If you've watched even one episode of Family Guy, you know exactly what a cutaway gag is, even if you've never heard that term before. It's when the show suddenly stops the main story to show you something completely unrelated. Peter might be arguing with Lois about something, and then he'll say, "This is worse than the time I fought that giant chicken," and boom, the show cuts away to a scene of Peter fighting a giant chicken for 2 minutes. Then, when that scene ends, we're right back where we started, with Peter and Lois arguing. The cutaway scene has nothing to do with advancing the plot. It's just there to make a joke. Or Stewie might mention something about his past, and suddenly we're watching a scene of baby Stewie doing something ridiculous in a completely different location. Then we snap back to the present moment like nothing happened. These cutaway gags are everywhere in Family Guy. Some episodes have 5 of them, some have 10, some have even more. They're so common that if you removed all the cutaway gags from a Family Guy episode, you'd probably have about 12 minutes of actual story left. The cutaways aren't just part of Family Guy's style, they are Family Guy's style. It's the thing the show is most known for. Here's the problem. The Simpsons did it first. Now, The Simpsons didn't use cutaway gags nearly as often as Family Guy does, but they definitely used them. And some of their cutaway gags became iconic moments that fans still talk about decades later. One of the most famous examples is from an episode called Selma's Choice from 1993. Homer is trying to decide whether to go to a company picnic or Uncle Tyrone's funeral. While he's thinking about it, the show cuts away to Homer imagining himself at a place called the Land of Chocolate. Everything in this fantasy world is made of chocolate. The buildings, the trees, even the dogs. Homer walks around in a daze, taking bites out of everything. A chocolate salesman offers him chocolate that's half price. Homer doesn't say much, he just wanders around in paradise. Then, snap, we're back to reality. Homer never actually went to the Land of Chocolate. It was just a brief fantasy in his head that the show let us see. The whole scene lasts maybe 20 seconds, but it's incredibly funny and shows us something about Homer's character. When he has to make a decision, his mind wanders to food. Another example is from the episode Homer the Great from 1995. Mr. Burns is explaining something boring to Homer, and Homer's mind starts to drift. The show cuts away to show us what Homer is thinking about. Himself living under the sea like a character in The Little Mermaid, singing about his underwater house and eating all the sea creatures. Again, this doesn't advance the plot at all. It's just a funny window into Homer's imagination. Or there's the moment in Lisa the Simpson from 1998, where Hans Moleman is teaching a class about eating an orange. He's demonstrating how to peel it, and he gets frustrated and yells, "Just eat the damn oranges!" It's a random scene that appears out of nowhere, makes you laugh, and then the show moves on. The Simpsons use these cutaway gags to show what characters were thinking, to make quick jokes, or to parody something from pop culture. But they use them sparingly. An episode of The Simpsons from the 1990s might have 1 or 2 cutaway gags, or sometimes none at all. They were seasoning, not the main dish. Seth MacFarlane has been very direct about where he got the idea for Family Guy's cutaway gags. In 2014, he appeared at a festival called South by Southwest, which everyone just calls SXSW. During an interview there, he openly admitted that The Simpsons pioneered the cutaway gag technique in animated sitcoms. MacFarlane specifically mentioned Homer's Land of Chocolate fantasy as an example. He said The Simpsons used cutaway gags in limited form, and that there were things like that they used sporadically. Then he explained that when he was creating Family Guy, he went into it thinking about how to use cutaway gags structurally. That word structurally is important. MacFarlane wasn't saying I wanted to use cutaway gags occasionally like The Simpsons did. He was saying he wanted to build Family Guy's entire structure around cutaway gags. He took something The Simpsons used as an occasional tool and made it the foundation of his show. And that's exactly what happened. Where The Simpsons might show one brief fantasy sequence in an episode, Family Guy would show 8 or 10 unrelated scenes that had nothing to do with the main story. Where The Simpsons used cutaways to reveal character thoughts or make a quick joke, Family Guy used them constantly, sometimes cutting away from cutaways, creating layers of scenes that had nothing to do with each other. There are compilations on YouTube of just Family Guy's cutaway gags from a single season. People have made videos titled Family Guy Best Cutaways that run for 20 or 30 minutes, just showing cutaway after cutaway after cutaway with no main story at all. That's how central these gags became to the show's identity. Now here's where this gets really interesting. In the late 2000s, some writers from The Simpsons confirmed something that fans had suspected for years. They said that The Simpsons had deliberately stopped using cutaway gags as much because Family Guy had made them their signature move. Think about what that means. The Simpsons pioneered a technique. They used it occasionally and effectively. Then Family Guy took that technique and used it so much, so constantly, that it became associated with Family Guy instead of The Simpsons. So The Simpsons backed off from using it because they didn't want people to think they were copying Family Guy, even though they had done it first. That's like if you invented a special kind of dance move, used it sometimes in your performances, and then someone else started doing that same move in every single performance until everyone associated the move with them instead of you. So you stopped doing the move you invented because you didn't want people to accuse you of copying the person who copied you. One article from 2024 about this situation said, The Simpsons paused one classic gag because Family Guy kept copying it. The article explained that during an interview, MacFarlane admitted The Simpsons was directly responsible for Family Guy's frequent use of cutaways. And because Family Guy used them so much, The Simpsons pulled back from a technique they had created. This is probably the clearest, most undeniable example of Family Guy taking something from The Simpsons. It's not a general influence or using the same sitcom formula. This is a specific comedy technique that The Simpsons pioneered in animated sitcoms, and Family Guy took it and made it their whole identity. But the controversy around cutaway gags goes even deeper than just The Simpsons being annoyed about it. Other people in the animation industry noticed what Family Guy was doing, and some of them weren't quiet about their feelings. In 2006, the show South Park created a 2-part episode called Cartoon Wars that absolutely destroyed Family Guy over its use of cutaway gags. And when I say destroyed, I mean they dedicated 2 full episodes, 44 minutes of content, to explaining why Family Guy's writing was lazy and bad. In these episodes, South Park revealed that Family Guy was written by a group of manatees living in a tank. These manatees would select random balls from a pile, and each ball had a word written on it, things like date, winning, Mexico, Gary Coleman. The manatees would push 5 balls into a machine, and the machine would generate a cutaway gag based on those random words. The joke South Park was making is that Family Guy's cutaway gags are random. They're not based on character or plot or anything meaningful. They're just random combinations of pop culture references and absurd situations thrown together because they might make people laugh, not because they add anything to the story. One of the characters in South Park, Cartman, gives a speech that sums up the criticism perfectly. He says, "I am nothing like Family Guy. When I make jokes, they are inherent to a story." Deep situational and emotional jokes based on what is relevant and has a point. Not just one random interchangeable joke after another. Another line from the episode says, "If you look closely at the writing in Family Guy, you will see that the jokes never derive from the plot." That's the core criticism of Family Guy's cutaway gags. They're not connected to what's actually happening in the episode. They're just random funny scenes inserted into the middle of the story. You could take any cutaway gag from any Family Guy episode and put it in any other Family Guy episode, and it would work exactly the same, because the cutaways don't depend on context. What's fascinating is how Seth MacFarlane responded to South Park's brutal criticism. He didn't get angry. He didn't say South Park was wrong. In a 2012 interview with Rolling Stone magazine, MacFarlane said he thought the South Park episode making fun of Family Guy was funny and accurate. Let that sink in. The creator of Family Guy admitted that South Park's criticism was accurate. He agreed that his show uses random cutaway gags that don't derive from the plot. He just didn't think that was a bad thing. The Family Guy writers also embraced the criticism. In DVD commentaries for Family Guy episodes, The writers started referring to their own cutaway gags as manatee jokes, directly referencing South Park's depiction of manatees writing the show. They thought it was funny. They owned it. But just because MacFarlane and his writers weren't bothered by the criticism doesn't mean the criticism was wrong. Family Guy absolutely took the cutaway gag technique from The Simpsons and used it so much that it became the show's defining characteristic. That's not an opinion or an interpretation. That's what happened, confirmed by MacFarlane himself. Later, in other interviews, MacFarlane talked about how cutaway gags became something people looked down on. He said, "It's something that, in later years, has almost become something that's looked down upon." He acknowledged that the technique, which had worked so well for Family Guy in its early years, had started to attract criticism from people who thought it was lazy writing. And here's the thing, that criticism has a point. When The Simpsons showed Homer fantasizing about the land of chocolate, it told us something about Homer. He's a simple guy who loves food and daydreams about it when he should be thinking about important family decisions. The cutaway revealed character. When Family Guy shows Peter fighting a giant chicken for 3 minutes, what does it tell us about Peter? Nothing, really. It's just a funny action sequence. It doesn't reveal anything about who Peter is or why he makes the decisions he makes. It's just there to make you laugh. The Simpsons use cutaway gags as a tool to enhance storytelling. Family Guy uses cutaway gags as a substitute for storytelling. That's a big difference. And it's why people who care about writing and character development often prefer The Simpsons approach. But here's what we need to acknowledge. Family Guy's approach works, at least for their audience. The show has been on the air for over 20 years. Millions of people watch it. People share clips of Family Guy cutaway gags on social media all the time. The random, disconnected style that critics call lazy is the exact style that many fans love about the show. So we have a situation where Family Guy took a technique The Simpsons pioneered, used it way more frequently, got criticized for using it too much and too randomly, admitted the criticism was accurate, kept doing it anyway, and became hugely successful because of it. That's not just influence. That's taking someone else's innovation and exploiting it more aggressively than they did. The Simpsons invented the cutaway gag in animated sitcoms. Family Guy turned it into a formula and mass-produced it. The cutaway gag situation is the strongest piece of evidence that Family Guy directly copied from The Simpsons. It's not about general sitcom formulas that have existed for decades. It's about a specific technique that The Simpsons created, used effectively, and then had to back away from because Family Guy had made it their signature move. But here's where the story gets more complicated. Yes, Family Guy took the cutaway gag structure from The Simpsons. Yes, they used it way more than The Simpsons ever did. But in doing so, they created something that feels very different from watching The Simpsons. The constant cutaways, the random jokes, the willingness to abandon the plot for minutes at a time. That's not what The Simpsons does. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. So Family Guy stole a technique from The Simpsons, but used it in such an extreme way that the end result is a completely different viewing experience. And that raises a new question. If you borrow someone's tool, but use it so differently that you create something new, is that still theft? Or is that evolution? Section 6. Divergent evolution. How Family Guy became something else entirely. So far, we've built a pretty strong case that Family Guy borrowed heavily from The Simpsons. Same family structure, same sitcom format, same animation style, same network, and most damning of all, the cutaway gags that The Simpsons invented and Family Guy turned into their whole identity. But if we stopped our analysis right there, we'd be missing something crucial. Because anyone who's actually watched both shows knows they don't feel the same. Sitting down to watch The Simpsons is a very different experience from sitting down to watch Family Guy. And those differences matter when we're trying to figure out whether Family Guy is just a copy or whether it evolved into something separate. Let's start with the most obvious difference. Brian and Stewie can talk. In The Simpsons, the baby of the family is Maggie. She's been a baby for over 30 years of the show, and in all that time, she's almost never spoken. There have been a couple of special moments where Maggie said one word, and those moments were treated as huge deals precisely because Maggie doesn't talk. She's a baby. Babies don't have conversations. That's normal. The family dog, Santa's little helper, is even more limited. He's just a dog. He barks, he wags his tail, he does normal dog things. He can't talk, can't understand complex ideas, and mostly just exists in the background of scenes. Sometimes episodes will focus on Santa's little helper, but he's always portrayed as an animal, not as a character who can have discussions with the family. Now look at Family Guy. The baby, Stewie, talks constantly. He has a British accent for some reason, even though he was born in Rhode Island to American parents. He's a genius who invents time machines and builds weapons. He has complex thoughts about philosophy, culture, and his plans to take over the world. In early seasons, he openly talked about wanting to kill his mother Lois. Whether other characters can actually understand what Stewie is saying has never been entirely clear. The show seems to change the rules depending on what's funnier for any given scene. But regardless of who can hear him, Stewie is a fully developed character with his own personality, goals, and storylines. He's not just a baby, he's a genius baby who acts more like an adult than most of the adults on the show. Then there's Brian, the family dog. Brian doesn't just talk, he's basically a person who happens to look like a dog. He walks on two legs, drinks martinis, goes on dates with human women, tries to write novels, and has strong political opinions. He's probably the most educated and cultured member of the Griffin family. He also struggles with alcoholism and has a history of failed relationships. Brian is so much more than a pet that entire episodes are built around his relationship with Stewie. There's a whole series of special episodes called the Road to episodes, where Brian and Stewie go on adventures together. Road to Rhode Island, Road to Europe, Road to Rupert, and more. These episodes feature just the two of them, usually involving time travel or being stranded somewhere. And they've become some of the most popular episodes in the whole series. You could never do Road to episodes with Santa's Little Helper and Maggie from The Simpsons because they can't talk and don't have the kind of complex relationship that drives those stories. This is a fundamental difference in how the shows are structured. Family Guy has two characters who, in The Simpsons version of a family, would just be a baby and a dog, but in Family Guy are two of the most important and interesting characters in the whole show. This is a big deal. It means Family Guy didn't just copy The Simpsons family structure. They changed it in a significant way that creates different storytelling possibilities. But the talking dog and genius baby aren't the only ways Family Guy diverged from The Simpsons. The bigger difference is in the tone of the shows and how they treat their characters. The Simpsons, for all its satire and edge, has heart. The family genuinely loves each other. Homer is a bad father in many ways. He's neglectful, he's selfish, he's irresponsible. But the show makes it clear that he loves his kids. There are entire episodes about Homer trying to connect with Lisa, even though he doesn't understand her interests. There are moments where Marge stands by Bart, even when he's done something terrible, because he's her special little guy. The characters in The Simpsons are flawed, but they're three-dimensional. They have depth. They grow and change within episodes, even if they reset back to normal by the next episode. You can watch The Simpsons and care about what happens to these characters because they feel like real people dealing with real problems, just in animated form. Family Guy made a deliberate choice to go in a different direction. The Griffin family is dysfunctional in ways the Simpson family never is, and the show doesn't try to hide it or soften it. They lean into it. Peter Griffin has said, multiple times in different episodes, that he's no longer in love with Lois. He's openly stated that he doesn't really like his kids that much. He's cheated on Lois. He's done things that, if a real person did them, would probably end in divorce and therapy for the whole family. But the show plays it for laughs. Everyone in the family treats Meg, the teenage daughter, like garbage. They make fun of her constantly. They tell her she's worthless. They forget about her. Peter has literally said, "Meg, who let you back in the house?" There are jokes about the family wishing she didn't exist. This isn't just teenage daughter struggles like Lisa sometimes faces in The Simpsons. This is sustained, mean-spirited treatment of a family member, played for comedy. Stewie, as mentioned before, spent several seasons openly plotting to murder his mother Lois. Not in a "I'm mad at mom" way that a toddler might feel. In a "I'm building weapons and making detailed plans to kill her" way. The show treated this as funny rather than disturbing. The Griffin family doesn't really love each other the way the Simpson family does. They tolerate each other. They're stuck together. But there's no warm feeling underneath all the dysfunction. The show sacrificed character depth and emotional connection for the ability to make darker, more shocking jokes. This was a conscious choice by the creators. They saw what The Simpsons was doing, satirical but ultimately heartwarming stories about a family that cares about each other, and decided to do the opposite. They made a show about a family that's actively terrible to each other, where the dysfunction is the point, rather than something to overcome. When Matt Groening, creator of The Simpsons, first watched Family Guy, he had an interesting reaction. In an interview, he said, "My first take was, oh my God, We got competition, and they're outflanking us. This show is wilder and harsher and nastier. We used to get in trouble. We used to be the cause of the downfall of the United States. Think about what he's saying there. The Simpsons, when it premiered in 1989, was considered outrageous. Parents complained that it was inappropriate. Some schools banned Bart Simpson t-shirts. The show was seen as pushing boundaries and being too edgy for primetime television. But by 1999, when Family Guy premiered, The Simpsons had been on for 10 years and had become almost respectable. It was still satirical, still funny, but it wasn't shocking anymore. And here came Family Guy, which was wilder and harsher and nastier than The Simpsons ever was. Family Guy was willing to make jokes The Simpsons wouldn't touch. Jokes about rape, abortion, domestic violence, terrorism, disabilities, and pretty much every sensitive topic you can imagine. The show didn't just reference these topics, it made them into punchlines, often without any deeper commentary or point beyond the shock value. Critics and fans started describing Family Guy as a middle ground between The Simpsons and South Park. South Park, which premiered in 1997, had made its reputation by being as offensive and boundary-pushing as possible. It killed one of its main characters in almost every episode. It made fun of everyone and everything without apology. The Simpsons was satirical but family-friendly. South Park was offensive and proud of it. Family Guy positioned itself right between those two shows, more offensive than The Simpsons, but not quite as aggressively shocking as South Park. This positioning was intentional. By the time Family Guy came back from its cancellation in 2005, we'll talk more about the cancellation later, the show had leaned even harder into being the dark alternative to The Simpsons. It was the show you watched if you thought The Simpsons was too tame, but South Park was too much. It was the show that would go further than The Simpsons without going as far as South Park. Another difference between the shows is in how they use their settings. The Simpsons takes place in Springfield, but the show has always been deliberately vague about which Springfield. There are Springfields in almost every state, and The Simpsons has dropped hints over the years that seem to place their Springfield in different locations. This ambiguity is intentional. Springfield is meant to represent any American town, anywhere in the country. Family Guy is much more specific. The show takes place in Quahog, Rhode Island. It's clearly in the Northeast United States. Peter Griffin has a Rhode Island accent, which is a real accent from that specific region. The show makes references to New England culture and locations. While Quahog itself is fictional, it's anchored in a real place in a way Springfield never is. This specificity doesn't make Family Guy better or worse than The Simpsons, but it does make it different. The Simpsons is trying to be universal. Family Guy is more comfortable being regional and specific, even if that means some cultural references won't land for viewers from other parts of the country. The shows also differ in how much they prioritize plot versus jokes. The Simpsons, especially in its early years, cared about storytelling. Episodes had clear beginnings, middles, and ends. Character decisions drove the plot forward. The jokes came from the situations the characters found themselves in. Family Guy, with its constant cutaway gags, often seems to care more about individual jokes than about telling a coherent story. An episode might start with one plot, abandon it halfway through for a completely different plot, and then end with yet another situation. The through line isn't the story. It's just, here's 20 minutes of jokes, some connected to a plot and some not. This is what South Park was criticizing when they showed the manatees writing Family Guy. The accusation was that Family Guy doesn't have real stories, just random collections of gags strung together. And while that's an oversimplification, there's some truth to it. Family Guy prioritizes making you laugh moment to moment over making you care about what happens to the characters. All of these differences add up to shows that, despite their similar foundations, feel very different to watch. The Simpsons makes you laugh, but it also makes you feel things. You care about Homer trying to be a better dad. You root for Lisa to succeed even though the world doesn't appreciate her. You feel for Marge when her family takes her for granted. Family Guy makes you laugh, and that's about it. You're not supposed to care deeply about Peter or worry about his relationship with his family. You're just supposed to enjoy the jokes, no matter how random or disconnected they might be. Some people prefer the Simpsons approach. They want their comedy to have heart and meaning. They want to care about characters. They want stories that matter. Other people prefer Family Guy's approach. They don't want to feel emotions while watching a cartoon. They just want to laugh at shocking, absurd, random humor without worrying about whether it all connects to a meaningful story. Neither preference is wrong, They're just different. And the fact that both shows can exist and both be successful proves there's an audience for both approaches. So did Family Guy steal from The Simpsons? Well, yes, they clearly took the family structure, the animation style, the sitcom format, and the cutaway gag technique. But did they create something different enough to be its own thing? Also yes, the talking dog and baby, the mean-spirited humor, the shock value, and the priority of random jokes over storytelling all make Family Guy a fundamentally different experience. Family Guy is like someone who copied the blueprint for a house, but then painted it completely different colors, rearranged all the furniture, and invited much rowdier guests to all the parties. The foundation is the same, but what you experience when you're actually inside is totally different. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But not everyone in the animation industry was willing to give Family Guy credit for those differences. Some people thought the borrowing from The Simpsons was so blatant and the writing was so lazy that Family Guy deserved to be called out publicly. And in 2006, the creators of South Park decided to do exactly that in the most brutal way possible. Section 7. South Park's Nuclear Option. The Cartoon Wars Massacre. In April 2006, something unprecedented happened in the world of animated television. South Park, another adult cartoon that had been on the air since 1997, dedicated 2 full episodes to absolutely destroying Family Guy's reputation. Not 1 episode, 2. 44 minutes of airtime devoted entirely to explaining why Family Guy was bad television. This wasn't friendly teasing between rival shows. This was a planned, deliberate attack that exposed what South Park's creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone really thought about Family Guy's writing. And it turned out they thought it was garbage. The 2-part episode was called Cartoon Wars, and it's become one of the most famous moments in the history of animated sitcoms. Not because it was funny, though it was, but because it said out loud what a lot of people in the animation industry had been thinking privately for years. Here's how the episode worked. The plot was technically about the character Muhammad appearing in a Family Guy episode, which was controversial because depicting the Islamic prophet Muhammad is considered offensive by many Muslims. But that controversy was just the setup. The real target of these episodes was Family Guy itself, and how the show is written. In the South Park episode, a character named Cartman, who's usually presented as the villain of South Park, decides he hates Family Guy so much that he wants to get it canceled. He travels to Hollywood and eventually makes his way to the Family Guy studios. And that's where South Park reveals its devastating joke. When Cartman is taken to meet the Family Guy writers, he discovers that there are no human writers. Instead, the show is written by a group of manatees living in a large tank of water. Yes, manatees. Those big, gentle sea mammals that live in warm ocean waters and move very slowly. The manatees have a huge pile of balls in their tank, and each ball has a word written on it. Some balls have nouns like Mexico or Gary Coleman. Some have verbs like winning or date. The manatees would randomly select balls from the pile and push them through a hole into a machine. The machine would take whatever random words the manatees selected and turn them into a Family Guy cutaway gag. South Park actually showed this happening. In the episode, the manatees select these specific balls: date, winning, Mexico, Gary Coleman. The machine processes these 4 random words and creates a cutaway gag about Peter Griffin going on a date in Mexico with actor Gary Coleman and winning something. The joke South Park was making couldn't be clearer. Family Guy's writers don't actually write jokes based on character or story. They just throw random pop culture references together and hope something funny comes out. The cutaway gags have no connection to the plot because they're literally just random combinations of words. But South Park didn't stop there. They had Cartman give a whole speech explaining exactly why Family Guy's writing is bad. Cartman says, "I am nothing like Family Guy. When I make jokes, they are inherent to a story. Deep situational and emotional jokes, based on what is relevant and has a point. Not just one random interchangeable joke after another." Another character in the episode says, "If you look closely at the writing in Family Guy, you will see that the jokes never derive from the plot." These weren't just throwaway lines. These were direct, specific criticisms of how Family Guy is written. And South Park wasn't hiding their message or being subtle about it. They were saying, as clearly as possible, that Family Guy is lazy, random, and doesn't care about real storytelling. There's even a scene where Cartman runs into Bart Simpson at the Fox studio. Bart says he hates Family Guy too. This was South Park's way of suggesting that even The Simpsons, the show Family Guy copied from, recognized that Family Guy was a cheap imitation. When Cartoon Wars aired, it was a huge deal. People who worked in animation were talking about it. Fans were debating it online. And what came out in the aftermath was even more interesting than the episode itself. Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the creators of South Park, did commentary tracks for the DVD release of this episode. In those commentaries, they revealed what happened behind the scenes after Cartoon Wars aired. According to Parker, writers from The Simpsons sent flowers to the South Park offices after the episode came out. Flowers. That's not something you do casually. That's something you do to thank someone for doing something you really appreciate. Why would The Simpsons writers send flowers? Because South Park had just said publicly what The Simpsons writers had been thinking privately. They thought Family Guy was a copycat show with lazy writing, but they couldn't say that out loud because both shows were on Fox. It would have created problems with the network. So when South Park, which aired on Comedy Central and didn't have to worry about Fox politics, said it for them, The Simpsons writers were grateful. But it wasn't just The Simpsons. Writers from King of the Hill, another animated show on Fox created by Mike Judge, also reached out to Parker and Stone. According to Parker, the King of the Hill writers told them they were doing God's work by calling out Family Guy. Parker said something even more revealing in the commentary. He said, "They actually hate Family Guy more than we do, even though they won't say it." He was talking about the Simpsons writers. The people who made the show that Family Guy had borrowed so heavily from hated Family Guy even more than South Park did, but they couldn't say it publicly. Parker also described what he called this animation solidarity moment, where everyone did come together over their hatred of Family Guy. Think about what that means. Multiple teams of professional animators and writers from different shows all agreed that Family Guy was bad for the industry. They saw what South Park did and said, "Yes, exactly. Thank you for saying it." This wasn't just South Park being mean to a competitor. This was South Park expressing what multiple animation teams felt about Family Guy, but couldn't say themselves. The Cartoon Wars episode became a rallying point for people in the animation industry who thought Family Guy represented everything wrong with modern animated comedy. Now, you might expect Seth MacFarlane to be furious about this. South Park had just told millions of viewers that his show was written by sea animals picking random words out of a pile. They'd accused him of lazy writing. They'd suggested he was ruining animation. That's pretty harsh criticism, but MacFarlane's actual response was surprising. In a 2012 interview with Rolling Stone magazine, MacFarlane said he thought the South Park episode making fun of Family Guy was funny and accurate. Read that again. He said it was accurate. He agreed with South Park's criticism. He admitted that yes, Family Guy's cutaway gags are random and don't derive from the plot. He just didn't think that was a problem. MacFarlane did say he was confused by the personal venom that Parker and Stone showed toward him in other interviews. He felt like the criticism had gone beyond just criticizing the show and had become personal attacks on him as a creator. But he didn't deny that the specific criticisms about Family Guy's writing style were correct. The Family Guy writers also embraced the manatee joke. In DVD commentaries for Family Guy episodes released after Cartoon Wars aired, the writers started referring to their own cutaway gags as manatee jokes. They thought the South Park episode was funny and weren't ashamed to acknowledge that yes, their cutaway gags are kind of random. This response tells you something important about how Family Guy sees itself. They're not trying to be The Simpsons. They're not trying to write deep, character-based stories with meaningful themes. They know their show is built on random jokes and cutaway gags, and they're fine with that because their audience likes it. But just because MacFarlane wasn't bothered by the criticism doesn't mean the criticism was wrong. South Park made several valid points about Family Guy's writing. First, the cutaway gags really are random. You can take most cutaway gags from Family Guy and put them in completely different episodes, and they'd work exactly the same, because they don't depend on what's happening in the story. Second, the jokes really don't derive from character or plot. When Peter says, "This is worse than the time I," and then we see a random scene from Peter's supposed past, that scene doesn't tell us anything new about Peter. It's just a setup for whatever random joke the writers wanted to make. Third, Family Guy really does prioritize making individual jokes over telling coherent stories. Some episodes feel like collections of sketches rather than actual episodes with beginnings, middles, and ends. These aren't just opinions from South Park. These are observable facts about how Family Guy is structured. You can watch an episode and count how many cutaway gags there are, how many of them connect to the plot, and how many are just random. The numbers support South Park's argument. What makes the Cartoon Wars episode so significant in the history of these shows is that it forced a public conversation about what makes good animation. Is it okay for a show to prioritize random jokes over storytelling? Is it okay to use pop culture references as a substitute for character development? Is it okay to be derivative of another show as long as you're successful? South Park was saying no to all of those questions. They were arguing that Family Guy was bad for animation because it proved you could be lazy and still get huge ratings. Why work hard to create meaningful stories and developed characters when you could just throw together random cutaway gags and references to movies from the 1980s? The Simpsons and King of the Hill writers apparently agreed. They'd all worked hard to make shows that had both humor and heart, that told real stories while also making people laugh. And here was Family Guy, seemingly doing the minimum amount of work necessary and being hugely successful anyway. From their perspective, Family Guy was proving that the lazy approach worked. And if the lazy approach worked, why would networks fund the harder, more expensive, more time-consuming approach of making shows like The Simpsons? This is why the flowers and the God's work comments matter. South Park wasn't just making fun of Family Guy, they were making a statement about what animation should be. And a lot of professional animators and writers agreed with that statement. But here's the uncomfortable truth that South Park, The Simpsons, and King of the Hill all had to deal with. Family Guy was winning in the ratings. More people were watching Family Guy than were watching South Park or King of the Hill. The Simpsons was still the king, but Family Guy was a close second in Fox's animation lineup. So you had this situation where the professionals in the industry thought Family Guy was lazy and derivative, but regular viewers loved it. Critics might agree with South Park's assessment, but millions of fans disagreed with their wallets and their time, choosing to watch Family Guy week after week. The Cartoon Wars episode was South Park's attempt to change that. They tried to convince the audience that Family Guy wasn't worth watching, that it was empty calories, that it was damaging to animation as an art form. They made the strongest case they could, dedicating 2 full episodes to the argument, and it didn't work. Family Guy's ratings didn't drop. The show didn't get canceled. If anything, the controversy probably brought more attention to Family Guy and got more people to watch it. That must have been frustrating for Parker and Stone. They'd made what they thought was an airtight argument against Family Guy, and the audience just didn't care. People kept watching anyway. But while South Park was launching nuclear weapons at Family Guy, The Simpsons took a very different approach. They could have joined South Park in publicly destroying Family Guy. They had even more reason to be angry. Family Guy had copied their formula, their family structure, their cutaway gags, and their whole approach to animation. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But The Simpsons chose a different path, one that was much more subtle and, in some ways, much more interesting than South Park's direct attack. Section 8. The Simpsons' response. Surprisingly cordial feud. While South Park was dropping nuclear bombs on Family Guy with the Cartoon Wars episodes, The Simpsons was taking a very different approach. And this is interesting because The Simpsons had way more reason to be angry at Family Guy than South Park did. After all, Family Guy had copied The Simpsons' family structure, animation style, sitcom format, and cutaway gags. Family Guy premiered in the time slot right after The Simpsons on the same network. Seth MacFarlane had openly admitted that The Simpsons changed his entire career path. If anyone should have been furious about Family Guy's success, it should have been The Simpsons. But instead of attacking Family Guy the way South Park did, The Simpsons mostly just made gentle jokes about it. The Simpsons' jabs at Family Guy were what you might call background gags. These are little jokes hidden in the background of scenes that you might miss if you're not paying attention. For example, there might be a billboard in Springfield that makes fun of Family Guy, or a quick line of dialogue that references the show, but nothing major. Nothing that took over an entire episode. The most direct reference came in one of The Simpsons' Treehouse of Horror episodes, which are special Halloween episodes where the show does horror parodies and anything goes. In one of these episodes, Peter Griffin appeared on screen, very briefly. It wasn't a full crossover or team-up. Peter was just there for a second, and then the episode moved on. It was The Simpsons' way of acknowledging that Family Guy existed without making a big deal about it. This light touch was deliberate. Matt Groening, the creator of The Simpsons, could have done what South Park did and dedicated full episodes to explaining why Family Guy was derivative. But he didn't. And when he talked about Family Guy in interviews, he was surprisingly respectful. In an interview from 2014, Groening explained his first reaction to seeing Family Guy. He said, "My first take was, oh my God, we got competition. and they're outflanking us. This show is wilder and harsher and nastier. We used to get in trouble. We used to be the cause of the downfall of the United States." Notice what he's saying. He's not saying they copied us. He's saying they're competition. He's acknowledging that Family Guy went further than The Simpsons in terms of being wild and harsh and nasty. He sees it as a different show, not just a clone. Groening also said something really important in that same interview. When asked about accusations that Family Guy copied The Simpsons, he said he felt the styles were completely different, despite the similarities. He acknowledged the similarities existed, he wasn't blind to them, but he thought the execution was different enough that the shows felt separate. This is a much more generous take than what South Park offered. South Park said Family Guy was lazy and random. Groening said Family Guy was different and actually pushed boundaries The Simpsons hadn't pushed. There's another quote from Groening that shows his attitude toward the whole situation. He said, "First of all, I thought if The Simpsons hit, and I thought it would be a hit, my worry was that adults wouldn't watch because it's a cartoon, and there were no good cartoons on for adults. When that hit, I knew there would be new shows following." Think about what he's saying there. He expected other shows to follow The Simpsons. He knew that if The Simpsons proved adult animation could work, other people would try to make adult animation too. He wasn't surprised or offended by Family Guy's existence. He saw it as the natural result of The Simpsons opening the door. But Groening's friendly attitude doesn't mean The Simpsons never criticized Family Guy. They did. They just did it more subtly than South Park. Seth MacFarlane, the creator of Family Guy, confirmed in interviews that The Simpsons and Family Guy writers became friendly over time. He said the two groups of writers got to know each other and developed mutual respect, even if they made different kinds of shows. This friendliness eventually led to something that would have seemed impossible after the Cartoon Wars attacks from South Park, a full crossover episode between The Simpsons and Family Guy. On September 28, 2014, an episode aired called The Simpsons Guy. It was officially a Family Guy episode, not a Simpsons episode, but it featured both families meeting each other and spending time together. The episode was 44 minutes long, basically two regular episodes combined into one special event. The plot was simple, but perfect for creating tension between the two shows. Peter Griffin publishes an offensive comic in the newspaper that makes people in Quahog angry, so the Griffin family has to leave town. Their car gets stolen in Springfield, so they're stranded there. The Simpson family takes them in while they look for the car. While they're together, Peter and Homer discover they both love beer. Peter drinks Pawtucket Patriot Ale, which is made at the brewery where he works. Homer drinks Duff Beer, which is Springfield's local beer. They argue about which beer is better. Then, someone notices that if you peel the label off a Pawtucket Patriot Ale bottle, there's a Duff Beer label underneath. Pawtucket Patriot Ale is revealed to be a complete ripoff of Duff Beer. It's literally just Duff Beer with a different label slapped on top. This is not subtle. The episode was using beer as a stand-in for the shows themselves. Pawtucket Patriot copying Duff Beer is like Family Guy copying The Simpsons. Everyone watching understood what the show was really saying. The case goes to court, and Duff Beer wins. The judge rules that Pawtucket Patriot Ale is an illegal copy of Duff Beer. Symbolically, The Simpsons wins over Family Guy. The original beats the copy. But the episode doesn't end there. Peter and Homer get into a huge fight about the whole situation. And during this fight, they start yelling at each other about their actual shows. Homer complains about Family Guy's reliance on cutaway gags and random humor. Peter complains that The Simpsons hasn't been good in years and is just coasting on its reputation. They're literally saying to each other what fans of both shows have been arguing about online for years. The fight scene itself is interesting because it's done in different animation styles, showing off what both shows can do. At one point, they're fighting at Springfield Gorge, which is a famous location from an old Simpsons episode. The whole fight is both an homage to both shows and a commentary on their relationship. Eventually, Homer and Peter stop fighting and admit they actually respect each other. They agree to keep their shows a half hour apart with a pile of garbage between them. This was a joke about their time slots. The Simpsons airs at 8 o'clock, Family Guy airs at 8:30, and there's usually some other show between them. Syndication. But here's what makes this episode really interesting. Homer attacks Peter using his Emmy awards as weapons. He literally picks up his many Emmy trophies and throws them at Peter. Peter doesn't have any Emmys to throw back, which Homer points out. This is the show directly acknowledging that The Simpsons has won 37 Emmy Awards, while Family Guy has won only 9, and has never won the big awards like Outstanding Animated Program. The episode was basically saying, yes, Family Guy copied The Simpsons. Yes, The Simpsons is the original and technically won, but both shows can exist, both shows have audiences, and there's room for both of them on TV. The crossover got mixed reactions from critics. Some people thought it was funny and well done. Other people thought it was a cynical marketing ploy by Fox to boost ratings for both shows. Some critics said the episode felt more like Family Guy than The Simpsons, and they didn't like that Family Guy's cruder humor invaded Springfield. One review said the episode was Family Guy injecting cruelty into The Simpsons. The reviewer felt that Family Guy's mean-spirited approach to comedy didn't mix well with The Simpsons' more gentle satire. Another critic wrote that the crossover showcased the general awfulness of Family Guy by introducing its offensive brand of cruelty to the town of Springfield. This person clearly preferred The Simpsons' approach and thought the crossover made The Simpsons look bad by association. But fans of both shows generally liked it. On the website IMDb, where viewers rate movies and TV shows, The Simpsons guy has a rating of 8.4 out of 10, which is pretty high. Regular viewers enjoyed seeing the two families interact, even if critics were more skeptical. The fact that this crossover happened at all shows that the relationship between The Simpsons and Family Guy was never as hostile as South Park made it seem. Yes, there was tension. Yes, The Simpsons writers sent flowers to South Park after Cartoon Wars, but they were never willing to publicly attack Family Guy themselves. Part of this was probably network politics. Both shows aired on Fox. If The Simpsons had spent a whole episode destroying Family Guy, it would have created serious problems within the network. Fox executives wouldn't want their two biggest animated shows fighting with each other publicly, but part of it also seems to be genuine respect. Matt Groening saw Family Guy as competition, but also as a show that did something different. He didn't love everything about Family Guy, but he understood that it had found its own audience and its own voice, even if that voice started by imitating The Simpsons. There was one incident where things got less friendly, though. In a Family Guy episode from Season 6 called Movin' Out, Brian's Song, the writers created a scene where the character Quagmire rapes Marge Simpson and murders her family. This wasn't just a quick joke. It was a 75-second scene that Fox executives found too offensive to air. Seth MacFarlane fought to keep the scene in the episode. According to reports, he told Fox executives, "You are afraid of James L. Brooks, who is one of the main producers of The Simpsons." MacFarlane was accusing Fox of being too scared to air something offensive about The Simpsons. James L. Brooks and Al Jean, a writer for The Simpsons, were reportedly very upset about this scene. And according to multiple sources, Fox responded by creating a new rule. The Simpsons and Family Guy were banned from taking shots at each other from that point forward. So there was a limit to how friendly the relationship could be. Family Guy could make gentle jokes about The Simpsons, and The Simpsons could make gentle jokes about Family Guy, but they couldn't cross certain lines. And a scene depicting rape and murder of Simpsons characters definitely crossed that line. But even with that incident, the overall relationship between the shows remained relatively cordial. They made the crossover episode in 2014, years after the rape scene controversy. They found a way to work together and make something that both sets of fans could enjoy. This is very different from Family Guy's relationship with South Park. Trey Parker and Matt Stone have said publicly, "I just want to say for the record right now, we've seen Family Guy. We do hate it. We do hate Family Guy." There's no ambiguity there. They genuinely disliked the show. But The Simpsons never went that far. They acknowledged the copying, made jokes about it, even created a crossover episode that explicitly addressed it, but they never said they hated Family Guy. Why the difference? Probably because Matt Groening understood something that Parker and Stone didn't want to acknowledge. The Simpsons paved the way for every adult animated show that came after it, including Family Guy. You can't create a whole new genre of television and then get mad when other people work in that genre. The Simpsons opened the door to adult animation. Family Guy walked through that door. So did South Park, King of the Hill, Bob's Burgers, and every other adult cartoon that's come since. They all owe their existence to The Simpsons proving it could work. Groening could have been bitter about Family Guy's success. He could have spent years complaining about how MacFarlane copied his formula, but instead, he took a more mature approach, acknowledging the similarities, making gentle jokes about them, and ultimately accepting that Family Guy was doing its own thing, even if it started by imitating The Simpsons. The crossover episode ended with Homer and Peter agreeing to coexist. That seems to be the real relationship between the shows, too. They're not best friends, but they're not enemies. They're competitors who share some DNA, but have grown into different things. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But while The Simpsons was being generous and cordial about the whole situation, there was one place where the competition between the shows was brutal and unforgiving: the Emmy Awards. And when you look at how the television industry has judged these shows, the verdict is clear and harsh. Section 9. The Emmy Disparity. Industry judgment on quality versus popularity. If you want to understand how the television industry really feels about The Simpsons versus Family Guy, you don't need to read critics' reviews or listen to what other animators say in interviews. You just need to look at the Emmy Awards. The Emmy Awards are like the Oscars, but for television instead of movies. Every year, the television industry votes on which shows, actors, writers, and other people working in TV did the best work. Winning an Emmy is a huge deal. It means your peers, the other professionals in the industry, think you're doing excellent work. The Emmy Awards matter because they represent what people who actually make television think about your show. Regular viewers might love your show and give you great ratings. But if the people who understand how TV is made don't respect what you're doing, you won't win Emmys. So let's look at the numbers. And these numbers tell a very clear story about how the television industry views The Simpsons compared to Family Guy. The Simpsons has won 37 Emmy Awards, not nominations, actual wins. They've been nominated 78 times, which means they've won almost half the time they were nominated. That's an incredible success rate. Out of those 37 wins, 11 of them are for Outstanding Animated Program. That's the big award, the one that says, this is the best animated show on television this year. The Simpsons has won that award 11 times. No other animated show comes close to that record. The Simpsons has also won Emmys for writing, for music, for voice acting, for pretty much every category an animated show can win. The show has been recognized for excellence in every aspect of what it does. Now let's look at Family Guy. Family Guy has won 9 Emmy Awards total. That's not nothing. 9 Emmys is more than most shows ever win. But compared to The Simpsons' 37, it's a huge difference. Family Guy has been nominated 32 times and won 9 times, which is about a 28% success rate compared to The Simpsons' almost 50%. But here's what really matters. Family Guy has never won Outstanding Animated Program. Not once. 0 times. They've been nominated for it several times, but they've never won. Family Guy's 9 Emmy wins are mostly for voiceover performances. Seth MacFarlane has won Emmys for his voice work as Peter, Stewie, and Brian. Alex Borstein, who voices Lois, has been nominated multiple times. These are awards for individual performances, not for the show as a whole. There's one Emmy nomination that's particularly significant. In 2009, Family Guy was nominated for Outstanding Comedy Series. This is one of the biggest awards at the Emmys. It's not just for animated shows, it's for all comedy shows on television. Family Guy was competing against live-action sitcoms like 30 Rock and The Office. Family Guy being nominated for Outstanding Comedy Series was a huge deal because it was only the second animated show in Emmy history to get that nomination. The first was The Flintstones, way back in the 1960s. So Family Guy being nominated was historic. It showed that the television industry was willing to take animated sitcoms seriously as comedy, not just as animation. But Family Guy didn't win, and they've never been nominated in that category again. It was a one-time thing in 2009. So what do these numbers tell us? The television industry respects The Simpsons way more than it respects Family Guy. The Simpsons is seen as an artistic achievement that deserves recognition in multiple categories. Family Guy is seen as a show with good voice acting, but not as a show that represents excellence in animation or comedy writing. This isn't just about numbers on a shelf. These awards represent what thousands of people who work in television think about these shows. Writers, animators, directors, producers, actors, all the people who understand what goes into making a TV show, they vote on the Emmys, and they consistently vote for The Simpsons over Family Guy. Why is there such a big difference? Several critics and industry insiders have explained their thoughts over the years. One critic wrote, "Family Guy is not as smart or as clever as The Simpsons. It appeals to a broad audience and doesn't cater to elitism." What this person is saying is that Family Guy goes for easy laughs, shock value, random cutaway gags, pop culture references, while The Simpsons crafts more sophisticated humor that requires thought. Another analysis said, The Simpsons talks about society and makes a greater point while also being crass. This is what Emmy voters love. The idea here is that The Simpsons uses humor to say something meaningful about the world. Family Guy just uses humor to make you laugh, without any deeper message. One article about why Family Guy hasn't won major Emmys pointed out that the show suffers from what it called indiscriminate assortment of humor. The show does so many different kinds of jokes, physical comedy, shock humor, pop culture references, musical numbers, cutaway gags, that it's difficult to identify where the series' strength truly lies. In other words, The Simpsons knows exactly what it is and executes that vision consistently. Family Guy throws everything at the wall to see what sticks. And while that might entertain viewers, it doesn't impress the people who vote on Emmy Awards. There's another factor that several people have mentioned. Family Guy is seen as derivative. Remember, Emmy voters are professionals in the television industry. They understand the history of TV. They know that The Simpsons invented adult animated sitcoms, and that Family Guy came along 10 years later using the same formula. When you're voting on awards for excellence and innovation, you're more likely to vote for the show that invented something new than the show that copied what already worked. The Simpsons broke new ground. Family Guy walked on ground The Simpsons had already broken. One writer put it very directly, The Simpsons did it first. When you're the second show to do something, even if you do it well, you're not going to get the same recognition as the show that did it first. Family Guy itself is very aware of this Emmy disparity, and they've made it part of the show's identity. In 2017, Family Guy premiered an episode called Emmy-Winning Episode, and the entire episode was about Peter Griffin trying to win an Emmy Award for Family Guy. The episode opens with the Griffin family watching TV. Peter gets upset and says he's disappointed that Family Guy hasn't won a single Emmy since it debuted in 1999. Lois mentions that the crossover with The Simpsons didn't help. In fact, it might have made things worse because it only helped The Simpsons, not Family Guy. This is the show acknowledging, within the show itself, that it's been on the air for almost 20 years and hasn't won the awards that The Simpsons has won. It's also suggesting that working with The Simpsons didn't elevate Family Guy's reputation. It just reminded everyone which show was the respected one. In the episode, Peter decides he's going to win an Emmy by copying the style of shows that have won Emmys. He makes Family Guy episodes that look like Modern Family, Girls, Transparent, and other Emmy-winning comedies. He's trying to prove that Family Guy can do prestige comedy if they want to. But then, a group of Emmy-winning actors and writers show up at Peter's house to confront him. Characters voiced by real Emmy winners like Tina Fey, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and Kelsey Grammer appear, and they directly criticize Family Guy. They tell Peter that Family Guy will never win an Emmy because the show is constantly plagiarizing other media. They point out that many minority characters are voiced by white actors. They criticize the show's contrived writing and random humor. This is Family Guy making fun of itself, but it's also Family Guy acknowledging that the criticisms are real. The show knows why it doesn't win Emmys. The creators understand that the television industry sees their show as derivative, lazy, and offensive in ways that don't serve any greater purpose. At the end of the episode, Peter gives up on winning an Emmy. He decides that having his family is more important than having awards. It's a sweet ending, but it's also the show admitting that, yeah, we're never going to win the big Emmys, and we're okay with that. There's one more detail from this episode that's telling. At one point, Peter reads an email from a viewer who's in chemotherapy. The viewer writes to thank Family Guy for making him laugh during a difficult time, but the email addresses the show as The Simpsons and mentions a specific Simpsons episode. The joke is that even people who watch Family Guy sometimes confuse it with The Simpsons. Even the show's own fans can't always tell them apart, or at least can't remember which show did what. This is Family Guy making fun of the fact that they're seen as a Simpsons copycat. So Family Guy is fully aware of its Emmy problem and the accusations of plagiarism. They've made episodes about it, they've acknowledged it, but they've also decided they don't care because their show is successful anyway. And that's true, Family Guy is successful. The show has been on the air for over 20 years. It gets good ratings. It makes Fox a lot of money. It has millions of fans who love it exactly as it is. But success and respect are different things. Family Guy has the success. The Simpsons has the respect. The Emmy disparity shows that while regular viewers might enjoy both shows, the people who actually work in television and understand what goes into making quality TV have made a clear judgment. The Simpsons is a masterpiece of television. Family Guy is successful entertainment. That's not a small distinction. The Simpsons is taught in college courses. Academics write papers about it. It's in the Library of Congress as a culturally significant work. It changed what television could be. Family Guy is fun. It makes people laugh. It has memorable characters and quotable lines. But it's not changing television. It's not pushing boundaries in ways that matter to the industry. It's giving people what they want: easy laughs, shock value, random humor. But it's not creating art that the television industry wants to celebrate. Seth MacFarlane is clearly talented. He's won Emmys for his voice work, and deservedly so. He can do incredible character voices and brings real skill to his performances. But winning awards for individual performances is different from winning awards for creating groundbreaking television. The question we've been asking throughout this whole discussion is whether Family Guy stole from The Simpsons. The Emmy Awards can't answer that question directly. They're not designed to judge plagiarism, but they do tell us how the television industry views these shows in comparison to each other. And the industry's view is clear. The Simpsons is the original, innovative, important show that deserves recognition. Family Guy is the popular, entertaining, but ultimately less significant show that came after. You can argue about whether that's fair. You can point out that Family Guy has found its own voice and done things The Simpsons never did. You can say that Emmy voters are snobs who don't appreciate Family Guy's style of humor. All of that might be true, but you can't argue with the numbers. 37 Emmys versus 9. 11 wins for Best Animated Program versus 0. 1 nomination for Outstanding Comedy Series that didn't result in a win. The numbers tell a story. And that story is that the television industry sees one of these shows as a legitimate artistic achievement and the other as successful entertainment. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. However, there's one more twist to this story. Because while the Emmy Awards represent the industry's judgment, they don't represent the whole truth about these shows. There's another factor we haven't fully explored yet: the way both shows have turned the plagiarism accusations themselves into a marketing tool. And that's where things get really interesting. Section 10. The self-aware metagame, when plagiarism became the brand. Here's where the story of Family Guy and The Simpsons takes a really interesting turn. At some point, Family Guy stopped trying to defend itself against accusations of copying The Simpsons. Instead, they started making jokes about it. They began openly acknowledging that yes, they took a lot from The Simpsons, and they made that admission part of their brand. This is actually a pretty smart move when you think about it. If people are going to accuse you of something anyway, sometimes the best response is to admit it openly and make fun of yourself for it. That way, you control the narrative instead of letting your critics control it. One of the clearest examples of this happens in a Family Guy episode where Peter Griffin gets drunk. While he's drunk, he starts rambling and says, "We act like we didn't take a lot from The Simpsons, but we took a lot from The Simpsons." This isn't subtle. This is the main character of Family Guy, speaking directly to the camera, admitting that the show copied The Simpsons. There's no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. The show is confessing. But here's what makes this interesting. By having Peter say this, Family Guy is showing that they're aware of the criticism and they don't care. They're not ashamed. They're not trying to hide it. They're putting it right out there in the open, almost daring viewers to be mad about it. This kind of self-aware humor appears throughout Family Guy, especially in later seasons. The show constantly makes references to itself, to other shows, to the fact that it's a TV show with writers and producers. This style is called meta-humor, which just means humor that's aware of itself. The Simpsons does meta-humor too, but in a different way. When The Simpsons makes meta-jokes, they're usually clever observations about how TV works or how stories are told. When Family Guy makes meta-jokes, they're often just pointing out their own flaws and shrugging about them. For example, in the Emmy-winning episode we talked about in the last section, the show opens with a character named Chris saying, "Yay!" A crossover always brings out the best of each show. It certainly doesn't smack of desperation. Then another character, Stewie, interrupts him and tells him to stop. The joke is that Chris is saying exactly what critics said about crossover episodes, that they're desperate attempts to boost ratings rather than genuine creative choices. And Family Guy is acknowledging that, yeah, crossovers are kind of desperate, but they're doing them anyway. This happened right at the beginning of the episode, before the main story even started. The show was basically saying to viewers, "We know you think we're desperate. We know you think crossovers are cheap. We're going to do it anyway, and we're going to make fun of ourselves for doing it while we do it. The 2014 crossover episode with The Simpsons is full of this kind of meta-humor. The episode makes constant jokes about the differences between the two shows, and about which show is better. Early in the episode, when the Griffin family first arrives in Springfield, Peter warns his family not to drink the water because everyone in town looks like they have hepatitis. This is a joke about how the Simpsons characters are yellow. Meanwhile, Homer refers to the Griffin family as our albino visitors because Family Guy characters are drawn with normal skin colors instead of yellow. These jokes are the show directly acknowledging that yes, both shows have families with the same structure, but they're drawn differently. The episode is calling attention to the similarities while also highlighting the differences. Later in the crossover, there's the scene we already talked about where Homer attacks Peter with Emmy awards. Homer literally picks up his many Emmy trophies and throws them at Peter as weapons. Peter complains that he doesn't have any Emmys to throw back. This is the show openly acknowledging the Emmy disparity we discussed in the last section. The Simpsons has won tons of awards. Family Guy hasn't, and both shows are making a joke about it together. It's like they're saying, yeah, The Simpsons is more respected, we all know it, let's laugh about it. The crossover episode also includes the scene where Pawtucket Patriot Ale is revealed to be a copy of Duff beer. A character literally peels a Pawtucket Patriot label off a bottle to reveal a Duff beer label underneath. It's a perfect visual representation of the accusation that Family Guy is just The Simpsons with a different label slapped on top. And the episode doesn't shy away from this. In fact, it builds the entire plot around it. There's a court case where Duff Beer sues Pawtucket Patriot Ale for being a knockoff, and Duff Beer wins. The Simpsons wins. The original beats the copy. The episode is admitting that yes, Family Guy is derivative, and The Simpsons is the original. But here's the thing. The episode was marketed as a big event. Fox promoted it heavily. They made trailers showing the two families meeting. They got people excited about it. And it worked. Millions of people tuned in to watch. On the website IMDb, where viewers rate TV episodes, The Simpsons Guy has a score of 8.4 out of 10. That's based on thousands of viewer ratings. For comparison, most TV episodes are lucky to get above a 7.0. An 8.4 means people really enjoyed it. So even though critics said the crossover was cynical and desperate, even though the episode itself joked about being cynical and desperate, viewers loved it. The self-aware approach worked. By acknowledging all the criticisms and making them part of the joke, Family Guy turned potential negatives into entertainment. This pattern shows up in other places too. Remember how South Park depicted Family Guy as being written by manatees picking random word balls? After that episode aired, the Family Guy writers started calling their own cutaway gags manatee jokes in the DVD commentary tracks. DVD commentaries are the special audio tracks you can listen to when you watch a DVD, where the writers and producers talk about how they made the episode. In these commentaries, the Family Guy writers would make jokes like, "And here's another manatee joke," when a random cutaway gag appeared. They weren't offended by South Park's criticism, they thought it was funny, and they incorporated it into how they talked about their own work. This shows a level of self-awareness that's actually pretty unusual for a TV show. Most shows would get defensive when criticized. Family Guy just laughed and agreed. Seth MacFarlane's response to the South Park episodes is another example of this approach. Remember, he said the South Park episode was funny and accurate. He didn't deny the accusations or defend his writing style. He just acknowledged that, yeah, South Park was right about how Family Guy works, and he was okay with that. This created a weird situation where the plagiarism accusations became part of Family Guy's identity. The show was known for copying The Simpsons, and instead of fighting that reputation, they leaned into it. They made it part of their brand. Think about how unusual that is. Imagine if a musician was accused of copying another musician's style, and instead of defending themselves, they said, "Yep, I totally did, and here's a song about how much I copied them." That's essentially what Family Guy did. And here's the really clever part. By admitting to the copying, Family Guy made it harder for critics to attack them. If you accuse someone of copying and they deny it, you can keep pressing the accusation. But if they immediately agree with you, there's nowhere for the argument to go. The criticism loses its power when the person being criticized agrees with you. This also created a narrative that was good for both shows. The feud between The Simpsons and Family Guy became a story that entertainment news sites wrote about. When the crossover episode was announced, websites published articles with headlines like, The Simpsons and Family Guy finally cross over after years of rivalry. But was there actually a rivalry? Not really. As we discussed in the last section, The Simpsons was mostly friendly toward Family Guy, making gentle jokes, but never attacking them the way South Park did. And Family Guy openly admitted they copied The Simpsons. But the narrative of a rivalry was more interesting than the truth, so that's what got promoted. And both shows benefited from it. The controversy generated publicity. The crossover got huge ratings. Fox, which airs both shows, made a lot of money. This is where we need to ask an important question. If the plagiarism accusations became a marketing tool that helped both shows, does it even matter whether Family Guy actually stole from The Simpsons? In other words, the scandal became useful. The controversy generated attention. The self-aware jokes about copying made Family Guy seem clever and self-confident rather than derivative. And The Simpsons got to maintain its position as the respected original while also benefiting from the publicity of the feud narrative. It's possible that this was all intentional from the beginning. Maybe Seth MacFarlane knew that making a show similar to The Simpsons would generate controversy. And maybe he planned to use that controversy to get attention for his show. Or maybe it just worked out that way accidentally, and he was smart enough to recognize the opportunity and exploit it. Either way, the result is the same. Family Guy turned "they copied The Simpsons" from an accusation into a selling point. The show became known for being the edgier, nastier, more shocking alternative to The Simpsons. The copying wasn't a secret or a source of shame. It was just the starting point for something different. This is actually a pretty sophisticated understanding of how modern media works. In the age of the internet and social media, controversy gets attention. Being talked about is more valuable than being universally liked. Family Guy understood this and used it. The Simpsons, being the older and more established show, didn't need to use controversy in the same way. They had already proven themselves. They had the Emmy Awards, the cultural respect, the reputation as groundbreaking television. They could afford to take the high road and be gracious about Family Guy's existence. But both shows benefited from the narrative of competition. The Simpsons got to be the respected original that Family Guy could never quite measure up to. Family Guy got to be the rebellious upstart that pushed boundaries The Simpsons wouldn't cross. These roles complemented each other and created a story that kept people interested in both shows. Fox, the network that airs both shows, was probably the biggest winner in all of this. They had two successful animated sitcoms that generated publicity by being compared to each other. The crossover episode brought in huge ratings. The rivalry kept both shows in the news. From a business perspective, having two shows that play off each other like this is ideal. So when we ask, did Family Guy steal from The Simpsons? We have to consider that the question itself became valuable. The debate generated articles, YouTube videos, discussions on social media, and ultimately the crossover episode that millions of people watched. In this context, whether Family Guy actually stole anything becomes almost secondary to the fact that the accusation was useful to everyone involved. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But this raises a bigger question that we need to explore, because if we're going to judge Family Guy for following The Simpsons template, we need to acknowledge something important. This is how all of television actually works. Every successful show spawns imitators. Every innovation gets copied. And Family Guy following The Simpsons is just one example of a much larger pattern in how TV shows are created and marketed. Section 11. The bigger picture. How all television is iterative. We've spent a lot of time examining whether Family Guy stole from The Simpsons. We've looked at the similarities, the differences, what South Park said, what The Simpsons said, what the Emmy Awards tell us, and how both shows use the controversy for marketing. But there's one huge thing we haven't talked about yet. This is just how television works. Every successful TV show creates a wave of similar shows. Every time something new becomes popular, other creators and networks try to replicate that success. This isn't unique to The Simpsons and Family Guy. This is how the entire television industry operates, and it has been since TV was invented. Let's look at some examples from just the last 20 years to see how common this pattern really is. In 2008, a show called Breaking Bad premiered on a cable channel called AMC. It was about a high school chemistry teacher named Walter White who gets cancer and starts making illegal drugs to pay for his treatment and leave money for his family. Over 5 seasons, Walter transforms from a mild-mannered teacher into a ruthless criminal. Breaking Bad was a huge success. It won tons of Emmy Awards, got incredible reviews, and changed what people thought cable TV could do. And what happened after it became successful? Suddenly, there were shows about complicated, morally questionable main characters everywhere. Better Call Saul, which was actually created by the same people who made Breaking Bad, told the backstory of a lawyer from the original show. Ozark was about a financial advisor who gets involved with drug money and has to move to the Ozarks to launder cash. Narcos was about actual drug dealers and the agents trying to catch them. All of these shows followed the Breaking Bad formula. Take a normal person or show the criminal side of society, put them in a situation involving crime, show their moral decline or complexity, and make it dark and serious. The success of Breaking Bad proved audiences wanted complicated crime dramas with anti-heroes, so other networks made shows using that same formula. Did Ozark steal from Breaking Bad? Well, both shows are about normal family men who get involved in money laundering for criminals. Both are set away from big cities. Both show family relationships falling apart because of criminal activity. The similarities are obvious, but people don't usually accuse Ozark of plagiarism. They just acknowledge that it's working in the same style that Breaking Bad pioneered. Here's another example. In 2011, Game of Thrones premiered on HBO. It was a fantasy show based on books by George R.R. Martin, featuring dragons, medieval politics, sword fights, and complicated plots where main characters could die at any moment. It was dark, violent, had a huge budget, and took fantasy seriously instead of treating it like kids' stuff. Game of Thrones became one of the most popular shows in the world. And what happened after it became successful? Networks started making big-budget fantasy shows. Netflix made The Witcher, about a monster hunter in a medieval fantasy world. Amazon spent hundreds of millions of dollars making The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, a prequel to the famous movies and books. HBO itself made House of the Dragon, a prequel to Game of Thrones, about events that happened hundreds of years earlier. All of these shows followed the Game of Thrones template. Medieval fantasy setting, political intrigue, large ensemble casts, big battle scenes, moral ambiguity, willingness to kill major characters. Game of Thrones proved that audiences would watch serious, expensive fantasy shows aimed at adults, so other networks tried to replicate that success. Nobody really accuses House of the Dragon of stealing from Game of Thrones, even though it's literally set in the same world and uses all the same storytelling techniques. It's just understood that if something works, you make more of it. Let's look at comedies. In 2005, the American version of The Office premiered. It was a mockumentary, which means it was filmed like a documentary with characters talking directly to the camera, even though the events were fictional. The humor came from awkward situations, uncomfortable moments, and characters who were often clueless about how they came across to others. The Office became incredibly popular, and what happened? Suddenly there were mockumentary sitcoms everywhere. Parks and Recreation used the same format to tell stories about people working in a small-town parks department. Modern Family used mockumentary style to show three related families dealing with modern life. Abbott Elementary, which premiered in 2021, uses the same format for a show about teachers in an underfunded school. All of these shows use the exact same filming style as The Office. They all have characters talking to the camera. They all create humor from everyday workplace or family situations. They all use that specific mockumentary format that The Office popularized. But nobody calls them copycats. They're just working in the style that The Office proved could be successful. Or think about crime procedurals. In 2000, CSI, Crime Scene Investigation premiered, about forensic scientists solving crimes using scientific evidence. It was a huge hit and completely changed how crime shows worked. Before CSI, crime shows focused on detectives and their personal lives. After CSI, shows focused on the science and showed detailed examinations of evidence. What happened after CSI became successful? CSI Miami and CSI NY launched as spin-offs set in different cities. NCIS started as a spin-off of a different show but used the CSI formula. Bones was about a forensic anthropologist solving crimes. Criminal Minds focused on FBI profilers studying criminal behavior scientifically. All of these shows use the formula CSI created. Crime happens, team of specialists examines evidence, science solves the case. The details changed. Different cities, different types of specialists, different personalities, but the basic structure was the same. And nobody really complained about plagiarism. That's just how TV works. One more example from comedy. Friends, which ran from 1994 to 2004, was about a group of young people in New York City dealing with relationships, careers, and growing up. It was one of the most successful sitcoms ever made. After Friends ended, what happened? How I Met Your Mother premiered in 2005 and was about a group of young friends in New York City dealing with relationships and growing up. New Girl started in 2011 and was about young roommates in a big city. Happy Endings was about a friend group dealing with life and relationships. All of these shows followed the Friends formula. Group of attractive 20-somethings living in a city, dealing with modern relationship problems. Lots of humor about dating and careers. The pattern is clear. When something works on television, other people copy it. Not exactly, they change enough details to make it technically different, but they copy the core formula that made the original successful. And here's the thing we need to remember about The Simpsons and Family Guy. The Simpsons also copied its formula from earlier shows. Matt Groening has said repeatedly that All in the Family was a major influence on The Simpsons. All in the Family was a live-action sitcom from the 1970s about a working-class family dealing with social issues through comedy. The Simpsons took that formula, working-class father, patient wife, kids, social satire through humor, and animated it. That was the innovation. Not the family structure, not the sitcom format, not even the satirical approach to American culture. The innovation was putting all of that into an animated show that adults would watch. So if The Simpsons borrowed the sitcom formula from All in the Family and just animated it, and then Family Guy borrowed the same formula and also animated it, then are they both just using a template that's existed since the 1970s? That's a fair question. Seth MacFarlane has actually addressed this directly. When talking about adult animated shows, he said, "All those shows owe their existence, their stylistic paradigm, to The Simpsons." He's talking about shows like South Park, King of the Hill, Bob's Burgers, and yes, Family Guy. All of these shows exist because The Simpsons proved that adult animated sitcoms could work. Think about what the television landscape looked like in 1998 when Seth MacFarlane was pitching Family Guy to Fox. The Simpsons had been on the air for 9 years and was a massive success. It was making Fox millions of dollars. It was winning Emmy Awards. It was a cultural phenomenon. From Fox's perspective, why wouldn't they want another show like The Simpsons? They had proof that adult animated sitcoms worked. They had proof that audiences would watch them. They had proof that they were profitable. So when MacFarlane came in with an animated sitcom about a family, Fox's reaction was probably, "Great, this is a proven formula, let's do it." This is how television executives think. They don't want risky, untested ideas. They want things that have already proven successful. The Simpsons took a huge risk in 1989 when nobody knew if adults would watch cartoons. By 1998, that risk had been eliminated. Family Guy was a safe bet because The Simpsons had already proven the formula worked. This doesn't make Family Guy original, but it also doesn't make them unusual. Every network wants to replicate success. When AMC saw that Breaking Bad worked, they tried to make more dark dramas. When HBO saw that Game of Thrones worked, they immediately started developing more fantasy shows. When NBC saw that The Office worked, they developed Parks and Recreation with the same producers and same mockumentary style. Family Guy following The Simpsons is the same thing. It's Fox trying to replicate a successful formula, and it worked. Family Guy has been on the air for over 20 years and has made Fox billions of dollars. The difference between Family Guy's situation and these other examples is timing and uniqueness. When Breaking Bad premiered, there were already lots of crime dramas on TV. When The Office premiered, there had been other workplace comedies, but when Family Guy premiered, there was basically just The Simpsons in the world of primetime adult animated sitcoms. South Park existed and was successful, but South Park was very different from The Simpsons. Cruder, more offensive, more politically focused. King of the Hill existed, but it was more subdued and realistic than The Simpsons. Family Guy was the first show that really tried to do almost exactly what The Simpsons did, just with a different family. That's why the plagiarism accusation stuck to Family Guy in a way they haven't stuck to other shows. When you're the first show to copy a unique formula, it's really obvious. When you're the 10th show to copy that same formula, nobody cares anymore because it's just become a genre. If 5 more adult animated sitcoms about families had premiered between 1989 and 1999, Family Guy would have just been one more show working in an established genre. But because there was basically just The Simpsons, and then Family Guy showed up doing almost the same thing, the comparison was unavoidable. But here's what we need to understand. Demanding that Family Guy be completely original while working in adult animation is like demanding that a band playing rock music not sound anything like the Beatles. The Beatles were hugely influential in rock music. Every rock band that came after them was influenced by what the Beatles did. That doesn't mean every rock band stole from the Beatles. It just means the Beatles invented or popularized a lot of techniques that became standard in rock music. The Simpsons invented the adult animated sitcom. Every show that came after, including Family Guy, exists in a space the Simpsons created. They all use techniques the Simpsons pioneered. They all owe their existence to the Simpsons proving the concept could work. This doesn't excuse Family Guy from being very obviously based on the Simpsons template, but it does put that copying in context. Family Guy isn't doing anything unusual for television. They're just doing what every successful show does, finding something that works and making their own version of it. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The real question isn't, did Family Guy copy The Simpsons? Because the answer is obviously yes. The real question is that copying the same as stealing, or is it just how television works? And to answer that question, we need to look at all the evidence we've gathered and make a final judgment about what Family Guy really is: a copy and evolution, or something in between. Section 12, the verdict: inspiration, imitation, or theft. We've looked at this question from every possible angle. We've examined the family structures, the cutaway gags, the Emmy Awards, the South Park attacks, the Simpsons response, the self-aware marketing, and how all of television works through copying successful formulas. Now we need to actually answer the question: did Family Guy just steal from The Simpsons? Let's start by laying out what we know for certain, based on facts that nobody disputes. Fact number 1. Seth MacFarlane has never denied that The Simpsons influenced Family Guy. He's said it repeatedly, clearly, and publicly. In his own words, The Simpsons rewrote the rulebook and altered his trajectory. He's stated that watching The Simpsons made him completely change his career plans, from working at Disney to creating adult animation. This isn't something we're guessing at or interpreting. MacFarlane has admitted it directly. Fact number 2. The structural similarities between the shows are undeniable. Both feature overweight, beer-drinking fathers who work blue-collar jobs and constantly screw up. Both have patient wives who hold the families together. Both have 3 kids, including a baby. Both have family dogs. Both are set in fictional American towns. Both use the same animation style, the same episode length, and the same sitcom format. These aren't small coincidences. These are fundamental design choices that are almost identical. Fact number 3. Family Guy took the cutaway gag technique directly from The Simpsons and made it the foundation of their show. Seth MacFarlane admitted this at a festival in 2014, specifically citing Homer's Land of Chocolate fantasy as an example of what The Simpsons did that inspired him. The Simpsons invented this technique in animated sitcoms. Family Guy turned it into their whole identity. The Simpsons even stopped using cutaway gags as much because Family Guy had made them so associated with Family Guy instead. Fact number 4. The television industry has judged these shows very differently. The Simpsons has won 37 Emmy Awards, including 11 for Outstanding Animated Program. Family Guy has won 9 Emmys, none for Outstanding Animated Program. The people who actually make television have made a clear statement through these awards. The Simpsons is groundbreaking art. Family Guy is successful entertainment. Fact number 5. Other professionals in animation saw Family Guy as derivative. South Park dedicated 2 episodes to destroying Family Guy over its lazy writing. The Simpsons writers sent flowers to South Park after those episodes aired. King of the Hill writers said South Park was doing God's work. This wasn't just one rival show being mean. This was multiple animation teams agreeing that Family Guy represented a problem. So based on those facts, did Family Guy steal from The Simpsons? If steal means using the same basic family structure, the same animation approach, the same sitcom format, and the same cutaway gag technique that The Simpsons pioneered, then yes, absolutely yes. The evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. But if steal means doing something illegal or unethical, then no. Family Guy didn't break any laws. They didn't plagiarize specific jokes or copy entire episodes. They didn't pretend The Simpsons didn't exist or claim they invented adult animation. What they did was take a proven formula and make their own version of it. And as we saw in the last section, taking a proven formula and making your own version is exactly how television works. Breaking Bad created a template for dark crime dramas, and multiple shows followed that template. Game of Thrones created a template for expensive fantasy shows, and multiple shows followed that template. The Office created a template for mockumentary comedies, and multiple shows followed that template. Family Guy followed The Simpsons template. That's not unusual for television. What made it stand out was that they were the first show to obviously follow that specific template, so the copying was more noticeable than it would have been if they'd been the 5th or 10th show to do it. But here's where we need to complicate the story. Family Guy didn't just copy The Simpsons. They also changed important things. Brian and Stewie can talk. This is a huge difference from The Simpsons, where the baby never speaks and the dog is just a regular animal. Brian and Stewie have become two of the most important characters on Family Guy, with entire episodes built around their relationship. The Road 2 episodes featuring just those two characters are some of the most popular in the series. You couldn't do those episodes with Maggie and Santa's Little Helper from The Simpsons. The tone is fundamentally different. The Simpsons has heart. Homer loves his family even when he's being a terrible father. The Simpson family genuinely cares about each other underneath all the dysfunction. Family Guy went the opposite direction. Peter openly says he doesn't love Lois anymore and doesn't like his kids much. Everyone treats Meg like garbage. Stewie spent seasons plotting to murder his mother. The Griffin family is mean to each other in ways the Simpson family never is. The humor is different. The Simpsons uses satire to make points about society. Even when they're being funny, there's usually some kind of commentary or message underneath. Family Guy goes for shock value and random humor. They'll make jokes about rape, terrorism, and disabilities just for the shock of it, without any deeper meaning. The Simpsons makes you think while making you laugh. Family Guy just wants to make you laugh, or gasp, or be shocked. The cutaway gags, while borrowed from The Simpsons, are used so differently that they create a completely different viewing experience. The Simpsons might use 1 or 2 cutaway gags in an episode to show character thoughts or make a quick joke. Family Guy uses 8 or 10 per episode, and sometimes builds entire sequences around them. The constant interruptions to the plot mean that watching Family Guy feels totally different from watching The Simpsons, even though the technique came from the same source. So what does all this add up to? Family Guy borrowed The Simpsons blueprint, there's no question about that. They took the family structure, the animation style, the sitcom format, the cutaway technique, all of it. But then they pushed everything in more extreme directions. They made it nastier, ruder, more random, more shocking. They sacrificed character depth for offensive humor. They prioritized individual jokes over storytelling. The result is a show that's built on The Simpsons foundation but feels very different to actually watch. It's like someone took the blueprint for a house, built that house, and then painted it completely different colors, filled it with completely different furniture, and invited completely different guests to all the parties. The structure is the same, but what you experience inside is totally different. Is that theft? Or is that evolution? If we're being completely honest, it's both. It's theft in the sense that Family Guy absolutely took things that The Simpsons created and used them without creating something genuinely new. It's evolution in the sense that Family Guy pushed those borrowed elements in directions The Simpsons never went, creating a different product for a different audience. The best way to think about it is probably this. Family Guy is derivative. That's the right word. Derivative means something that comes from something else. Something that's based on an earlier work. It's not as harsh as saying Family Guy stole, but it's not as generous as saying Family Guy is original. Family Guy is derivative of The Simpsons. It takes The Simpsons' innovations and builds on them, rather than creating its own innovations from scratch. This makes Family Guy less impressive as a creative achievement, but it doesn't make the show worthless or bad. Think about it this way. McDonald's wasn't the first hamburger restaurant, but it became the biggest and most successful. Facebook wasn't the first social network, but it became the dominant one. Google wasn't the first search engine, but it became the one everyone uses. Being the first to do something is impressive, but being the most successful at doing something also counts for something. The Simpsons was first. They invented the adult animated sitcom. They took all the risks. They proved it could work. They deserve full credit for that innovation. Family Guy was not first. They saw what The Simpsons did and said, "We can do that too, but we'll make it edgier and more random." They didn't take creative risks the way The Simpsons did. They just made a calculated bet that The Simpsons audience would also watch a similar, but more extreme show. And they were right. Family Guy has been on the air for over 20 years. It's been canceled twice and came back both times. It has millions of fans. It's made Fox billions of dollars. By any measure of commercial success, Family Guy has been hugely successful. But commercial success and creative innovation are different things. The Simpsons changed what television could be. Family Guy gave people what The Simpsons proved they wanted. One is more admirable, but both are valid. The Emmy Award disparity tells the story clearly. The television industry respects The Simpsons as art and innovation. The industry sees Family Guy as successful entertainment, and both shows have embraced those roles. The Simpsons doesn't need to be edgy or shocking anymore. They've already proven themselves. They have the Emmy Awards, the cultural respect, the place in television history. They can afford to take the high road. Family Guy knows it will never be respected the way The Simpsons is. So they've leaned into being the crude alternative, the show that goes too far, the one that makes jokes The Simpsons wouldn't touch. They've turned their derivative nature into part of their brand through self-aware humor. Both strategies work for what each show is trying to be. So here's the final answer to whether Family Guy stole from The Simpsons. Yes, they copied the family structure. Yes, they copied the sitcom format. Yes, they copied the animation style. Yes, they copied and overused the cutaway gag technique. All of that is undeniably true. But no, they didn't do anything illegal. No, they didn't plagiarize specific content. No, they didn't pretend The Simpsons' influence didn't exist. And no, the end result doesn't feel like watching The Simpsons because they changed enough to create a different viewing experience. Family Guy is a copycat show that found its own voice. It's derivative, but distinct. It's unoriginal in structure, but unique in execution. It took what The Simpsons invented and pushed it to extremes The Simpsons would never go. Is that theft? That depends on how you define the word. If you think taking someone's blueprint and building on it counts as theft, then yes. If you think theft requires exact copying without any changes, then no. What we can say for certain is this. Without The Simpsons, Family Guy wouldn't exist. Seth MacFarlane has admitted this. The evidence supports it. The timeline proves it. The Simpsons created adult animated sitcoms. Family Guy is an adult animated sitcom. The connection is direct and undeniable. But we can also say this. Family Guy became something different enough from The Simpsons that millions of people prefer it. Some viewers like The Simpsons' heart and clever satire. Other viewers like Family Guy's shock value and random humor. Both shows can exist, and both can be successful because they serve different audiences, even though they started from the same template. The plagiarism debate has become part of both shows' identities. The Simpsons is the respected original that innovated and changed television. Family Guy is the controversial copy that pushed boundaries the original wouldn't cross. These narratives benefit both shows by keeping them in the conversation and generating publicity. In the end, asking, did Family Guy steal from The Simpsons, might be the wrong question. The better question is, does it matter? And the answer depends on what you value. If you value creative innovation and being first, then The Simpsons wins, and Family Guy is just a derivative copy that doesn't deserve respect. If you value entertainment and commercial success, then Family Guy wins because it found an audience and has kept them for over 20 years. If you value both innovation and evolution, then you can appreciate that The Simpsons opened a door and Family Guy walked through it and went somewhere different. Even if they used the same map to get started. The television industry has made its judgment through Emmy Awards. The Simpsons is the masterpiece. Viewers have made their judgment through ratings. Both shows are worth watching. And both shows have made their judgment through self-aware humor. They know exactly what they are and are fine with it. Family Guy didn't steal from The Simpsons in any legal sense, but they absolutely, undeniably borrowed everything they could from The Simpsons playbook and then tried to do it bigger, louder, and more shocking. Whether you call that theft, inspiration, imitation, or evolution, probably says more about your values than about the actual shows. The only thing we can say with absolute certainty is this. The debate itself has become more valuable than the answer, and that's probably the most Family Guy thing possible, taking something The Simpsons created and exploiting it for maximum impact. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.